Coming up, Mitch from the Video Vacuum is back on. We're going to be looking at the new one from Dolph, Wanted Man. So it's one that was directed by Dolph, starring Dolph. Also got Kelsey Grammer, of all people. So definitely fun to have some Kelsey Grammer there as well. So that's what we'll be talking about here in just a bit. Next week, we've got Freddie Young from Full Moon Reviews back on. We'll be looking at Undefeatable, the Cynthia Rothrock film. So I'm going to be talking about, I watched it on Tubi for my rewatch, but Freddie actually has a 4K version of it. So that was a fun conversation. I mean, it's always a fun movie, Undefeatable. And we hadn't given it the podcast treatment yet. So definitely, I think it was overdue for sure. And then not this Thursday, but next Thursday, we'll finish up our look at the Ip Man series with Ip Man's 3, 4, and then I think we're also going to look at that side one. Probably should have pulled up the title for it. I can't remember the name. It was like some kind of other movie that's like based off a character that was in part 3. So I'll look at that one as well, probably. So look for that on not this Thursday, but next Thursday. So you'll check that out. And then we've got a full slate set up for August. I know I had talked about maybe taking a week off in August, but I think at this stage I've got us scheduled out for podcasts for the entire month. So might be better off just to bang out those episodes and call it good. So, because we've got some fun people scheduled here. So we got Will from Exploding Helicopter. We've got Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time and New Horror Express. Of course, Ty come up and so we do our usual hit there. We'll be looking at what are the two? We're going to look at a Dr. Drew movie called Final Kill. So we got some interesting ones there. And then John Cross from After Movie Diner. We're talking about scheduling to have him on. I'm not sure exactly what the subject will be for that one, but that should be a fun one as well. So we've got everybody scheduled. We just got to record them. So I might just not worry about taking a week off in August, and we'll just keep plugging right along. Keep doing those once a week episodes. Another thing on the site is, if you go through the archives, right, you'll see that it only goes as far back as episode 12, right, and those previous 11 are missing. So as I've probably mentioned before, TalkShoe was the original hosting site for the podcast. So when I the earliest iteration of the podcast, where I had Jamie as the co-host in 2014 into 2015, the way it worked was John Cross from After Movie Diner and Mo Porn from Drunk on VHS and No Budget Nightmares. I guess he's Mo Von Held. Von Hedel, so if you go onto his Instagram, it'll be something there. But anyway, they were starting their own night of podcasts, and that's when they invited me on. Because I'd been on Drunk on VHS a couple times, and it was a fun experience. And those episodes were in. I think John archived all those Drunk on VHS, so you can check those out. But yeah, so they were like, "Hey, Matt, you want to do a show for an hour every Wednesday?" So they had kind of a whole night of podcasts on that Wednesday night. So the way that the show worked was that I would record on Mixler, and people would come in through Skype or whatever and be recorded in through there. And then you could download the Mixler episode, and then I would maybe clean that up, or I don't know if I cleaned it up. Sometimes I would have to truncate it or something, because TalkShoe would only let me do so big. I can't remember what the deal was, but because sometimes you'll notice the episodes are more than one. There's two parts if you go into the archives, right? Some of them will have 2 episodes in there, or 2 parts. It's like 2 separate podcasts. So yeah, I can't remember exactly what the deal was, but that was sort of how I recorded the shows. And then I hosted them on TalkShoe. John actually turned me on to TalkShoe. He's like, "Yeah, it's great. It's a free hosting site and everything like that." At some point in 2015, after we were kind of done with the podcast at that point, it's sort of that Mixler night is sort of like people dropped off, and eventually it was just Jamie and I doing the show. And then she had moved to Michigan, and I was sort of kind of work things like that was starting to happen. It was kind of one of those things where slowly we were having trouble scheduling, and it just sort of wasn't working anymore. And it just kind of the whole thing, as you know, I went on hiatus complete with everything for about 4 or 5 years. But TalkShoe had a meltdown of its server, and all of my 2014 episodes disappeared. So I went back. I've kind of been trying to re-upload those. Now there's 2 of them that were done when I got married. So I think it's August 20th and August 27th, which would have been episodes 10 and 11. Those are ones that John did with Jamie, because I was, getting married and doing our honeymoon, which we didn't really go anywhere special for the honeymoon. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which it's a nice place. It's a really nice place to be. And then we did some stuff here in Philadelphia. But anyway, but for those 2 weeks, John did those. He has those. He sent those to me, and then of course I put them on TalkShoe, and then they disappeared. I don't even know where I have those two. I actually went to see if the old Dropbox link worked, and of course it didn't. It's been like 10 years, right, at this point. So yeah, Dropbox doesn't keep those links that long. He may have them, but I doubt it. But I've got them on a computer. The problem is the computer screen doesn't work, so I've got to like hook it up to a monitor, which I don't have any monitors hanging around that work. So I had to figure that out. But those two episodes, 10 and 11, I probably won't be able to get those up. But I started listening to number 9, which is actually the first time that Ty and Brett from Comeuppance were on. And I was listening to that one, and something weird was happening with the audio where the like Jamie would speak and you hear it like very faint, and then suddenly it would come in louder as it, like what she was saying, the full audio would come in louder, and then I would speak over it because I guess there was a delay with that second bit of audio. So I have to take a look at that and see if there's something that can be fixed with that. See what happened there. So it's possible that even those previous episodes that I recorded, that I might not be able to post them because the audio might be so bad. So it might be that episode 12 is like the final episode, like that's as far back as we go. I don't know. Those episodes that we lost, we had some good guests on there for those. So we had Richard Pierce, who I've talked about the episode that he did with Ty and Brett from Comeuppance. He was on, I can't remember, I think if he talked about Ambush, that might have been, I can't remember, but he was actually telling us about Sector 4 Extraction, which if you go on I think it's on his Instagram, he posted pictures of himself finding that movie on the shelves, and he was talking about what a crazy experience it was working with Olivia Gruner, and crazy not in the best sense, but he was like all excited about the movie, coming on to talk about it with us. That episode disappeared. Again, I've got it on my computer somewhere so I can see what the audio sounds like. What else do we have? Freddie Young, who is going to be on next week. He was on an episode that we lost. Mitch, who's on today, he did an episode that was lost. So we've had kind of a lot of different people on. And then, of course, some of them were just Jamie and I talking. There's also a solo one that I did on Steven Seagal. I wasn't quite as good at doing solo ones. And not that I don't know how good or bad I am at doing them now. I just enjoy doing them. But I did like a horrible. I was like trying because I had to fill an hour, and now it's like, of course, I can do an hour on anything now. I can do 2 hours, 3, it's like I have to like rein myself in. But at that time I was like struggling to find an hour to talk about Seagal. And then that was when Jamie offered to be a co-host. And so then I didn't have to worry about booking guests all the time because I was having trouble getting guests to start with. I was just, it was new to it, the whole thing. I wasn't good at it. But that one I think would be like episode 0. Like I didn't think I counted that as an episode. I didn't put it on TalkShoe or anything like that because it was so bad. But maybe I will. Maybe I'll put it there as like an episode 0. If it's any good, I can't remember else to see what the audio is. So anyway, yeah, so we'll see about maybe if I can get some more of those old episodes up. But yeah, if the audio is bad, I don't necessarily want to post them because they don't sound good. Like for example, with Ty and Brett, like they were new to being able to do podcasts at the time, and so they were sharing a microphone, and it has a lot of crackling and stuff like that with it. So I'll have to double check on that too to see. Obviously now it sounds much better. Like Ty's on the podcast every month, right? You don't hear any of that kind of stuff. So it's kind of funny to think about like these things were just starting 10 years ago. And kind of how new we were to all of that stuff, and now we're kind of just used to it. And even kind of what I'm doing now is it feels so basic, but I think even compared to what I was doing back then, it's more advanced. So, but anyway, so I'm going to try and see what I can do about getting some of those, especially in weeks when I don't have a solo podcast. If I can get some of those old archive ones up and kind of fill out that 1 through 11 that's missing on the archives there, and see. So as always, watch this space and we'll see what we have there. And then this Saturday is Crackerjack 2 on the blog. So we just did Frankenhooker. We'll do Crackerjack 2, and then after that, I'm not really sure what's coming. I'm not sure what we'll do in terms of the site. I've got some ideas. I talked about maybe doing like the women director one, and I still think that's kind of an idea that I'd like to go with. And if that's the case, then obviously whatever you're seeing there on upcoming reviews watched is not the case. Like I guess after Crackerjack 2, I've got the Roadhouse movie listed as the next one, and then after that it would be Ruthless, which I probably should get Ruthless in at some point just to get more Art Camacho on the site, if anything, and that's one that he directed. So. That's I guess tentatively where we'll go, but just always watch that space, that letterbox list. You can get a sense of where I'm going with recording things. The other things, I'm traveling. I'm going to be actually doing a same day round trip to Chicago to see a Cubs game. So kind of a long story there, but so I'll be out on Wednesday. And then coming back on Thursday, but I'm going to be tired when I get back on Thursday. So, so we'll see kind of how I keep up with everything there, but we'll kind of go from there. And then I was trying to think if there's anything that has dropped. I don't think I know John and I just recorded for Sleazy Spader's Springtime. We did a Shadow of Fear. So it was quite an interesting movie. The podcast we did, the recording we recorded for a good amount of time. So I don't know how he's going to post that. If he might just do it all in one big thing, or he might break it into a couple episodes. Whatever he decides to do. But you should be subscribed to After Movie Diner anyway, so you can get that and check that out. But yeah, that's that'll keep an eye out for that one. That's I think is the only thing that I've recorded lately for anybody else. And of course, just recording for the podcast here for us as well. Yeah, so I guess we'll kind of break in here. I'm going to quickly do my initial thought piece here. And one thing I was realizing is I don't know if I'll have this every week. I think I've got to, I'm not going to try to force myself to have an idea, because I think I think sometimes I feel like, I need to have something for this segment. Whereas like over the course of the week, I think what I'll do is like for example in this situation, I had these ideas that came up that I felt like I needed to bring up, and so I think that if that happens, then I'll do an initial thought. Otherwise, I'll just skip. We'll go right to the beginning here. But anyway, the initial thought that I had was I watched Drive Away Dolls, the new the Ethan Coen film that I guess with the two brothers, I guess they're doing solo stuff now. So you had Joel did Macbeth, and then Ethan did Drive Away Dolls, which I think of the two, I like Macbeth better. My New England accent just came out there. I like Macbeth better, I did enjoy Drive Away Dolls. I think it was good. I saw it had some pretty rough reviews on IMDb, but then it seemed like some of the critics were a little bit better with it. I thought it was fun. I enjoyed the movie, but two things happen that are pet peeves of mine when it comes to movies. And the first one is that this movie starts out in Philadelphia, and parts of the film take place in Philadelphia, even though it was shot in Pittsburgh. So first of all, they're faking Pittsburgh for Philadelphia. I know in Shazam, they shot in a few parts, like they shot near the art museum and stuff like that in Philadelphia, but for the most part, they shot in Toronto. It was I accept that a little bit more because it was like a fake Philadelphia that took place in the DC comics. I can't remember. I guess it's like because there's like the when Shazam was owned by another comic book company, and when they bought that company, I guess they just placed those characters in a neighborhood in Philadelphia. I don't know if that's exactly how it worked, but I guess I should say I was a little bit better with the fact that they shot outside of Philadelphia for Shazam, because it worked a little bit better. And then plus they shot enough in Philadelphia. But here, we get one shot of William Penn on the top of City Hall. But for the most part, right, it's not. I mean, I look at it, I'm like, that's not Philadelphia. You just know right away. I've been living here for 10 years now, and I can see it. But the pet peeve that I have about things that take place in Philadelphia is that they never do the accent. And so the Philly accent is a very unique and specific accent to Philadelphia, but it is the most authentic thing. It's one of the most authentic things about Philadelphia. People talk about the cheesesteak, or I don't know, like the Liberty Bell, things like that. But it's the accent. If you don't have the accent, you don't have Philadelphia. And so you've got like a character who like runs the drive away rental thing. Curly. He's primed for the accent, and he doesn't have it. You have other characters that talk with more of like a New York accent. I mean, that's usually what they approximate it with, is the New York accent, and that's not what it is. I talked about the accent with Mitch, actually, who's going to be on in a bit here to talk Wanted Man, back last summer when we talked about Wave Productions. Wave Productions is based out of South Jersey, kind of near here in Philadelphia, and some of the actresses some of the actors that they got for Wave Productions were from South Philly, and so you'd hear the accent with them when they were talking, and because Mitch being from Maryland, it's kind of like the O is one of the hallmarks of the Philly accent. It's thicker and deeper in Maryland, so it's even stronger there. The accent kind of shifts as you go from Jersey kind of down through to Maryland, and like when I used to if I would go see a baseball game in Wilmington, Delaware, they have a single A baseball team. When you take the commuter rail, you actually can hear the accent shift as you go from like South Philly to what they call Delco, Delaware County in Pennsylvania, into Delaware, where the accent that O is stronger. I try to think the best way to do that, because the O will come out when I'm talking. Like sometimes I'll just tell somebody, "Oh, can you send that over?" and I don't even know how I say it. Like, I don't even know. It just sort of comes out. When I moved here to Philadelphia, I was like, I'm not going to pick up the accent. Like, I'm not going to try to speak like the locals here. Like, I didn't want to try to affect the accent or something like that. And to be honest, I can't even do an impression of the accent because it's that hard to mimic. But it just comes out sometimes. Sometimes I just say things like, so in Philadelphia, they don't say water, they say wooder. And like for Italian ice, they call it wooder ice. And there are a couple that, like, the other day I was saying to the cat, I was like, oh, do you need some more wooder? And I was like, I didn't mean to say that. It just sort of came out. But I mean that's probably the easiest one is wooder. Like, you can have people saying wooder. But yeah, like I remember because Bradley Cooper's from this area. He's probably the best at doing the accent. And I remember there was a clip of him on YouTube where he was doing one of those like hacky morning show kind of things. And they were doing this whole like, oh, let's do a Philadelphia like dictionary thing, And they were like, how do you say water? And he was like, and like he kind of just takes it over because he's like, okay, this is hacky and dumb. And he's like, yeah, I learned the accent from this ad. And the ad went something like, let's get some hoagies and sodas and go down to shore. And like, that's kind of it, right? That's like the best I can approximate. But like, it's like one of those things where I can't do the impression. Like, I can do a Mass accent or New England accent a little bit better. Pak the ka and have it yada, something like that. But again, even that one, it's like, it's hard for me to do it just to do it. Like, it's almost like it has to come out naturally when I'm talking. And that's it with the Philly one. Tina Fey does the Philly accent really well. But see, she's from a different part of, her family's from a different part of Philadelphia. So she's originally from Upper Darby, where we lived. It's in Delaware County. But she talked about her aunt who was in Fishtown, which is up in the upper Northeast. And one of the things about Philadelphia, because it doesn't have a great public transportation system, that you have these isolated communities that sort of develop their own accents. And I know when I went up to the Northeast to check out this Filipino fast food chain, Jollibee, that they had here, I wanted to try it. And on my day off, I kind of just went up there. It was quite a trip. I had to take the subway to the furthest stop, which is Fern Rock, and then take a bus from there for like another like half hour to where this place was. So it's not easy to get to. So like people in that area aren't coming down to where I am in South Philly or anything like that unless they're going to see sporting events, and in those cases they're going to drive here. So they kind of develop their own accent. So that's the other piece of it, is that the accents kind of vary within the city. But it's the most authentic piece. I mean, there's a show called Abbott Elementary, which you may have seen on TV. It takes place here in Philadelphia. And they have an actress, or they have a character who's based here in South Philly, who she's originally from Maryland. So she should be able to approximate the accent, and she just does a crap New York accent instead. So yeah, that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves. If you're going to shoot something here, if you feel like you've got to set something here in Philadelphia, you need to do the accent. People need to have the accent. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. I mean, when I go out to places, I hear that accent everywhere. It is, again, I think it's the most authentic Philadelphia thing, is the accent. And if you don't have it, it's not worth it. So that's my first pet peeve. The other one is that the film is set in 1999. And I guess they said it in 1999 because it meant it's an interesting time, because you've got cell phones, but not everybody has them, right? So you can use cell phones when you need to have them for the plot, and then not have them when it's important for the plot. So it's a big part of this plot, right? Is that these two young women, they take this rental car, and they don't know that there's contraband in the trunk. And then the people who want the contraband, they need to get the contraband back. And it's really easy if they can just call the cell phone, right, and get a hold of them. But at the same time, it's nice, so not having the cell phone, right? The two characters not having a cell phone means that they nobody can get a hold of them. They have to track them down. But at the same time, in 1999, because some people did have cell phones, or enough people did, that the baddies having the cell phone, they can communicate with their bosses over the cell phone, right? So for that time period, I get wanting to set it in that time period, to be able to use cell phones as a device when you need to and not when you don't. But the problem with 1999 is that I always see whenever things are set in that kind of that late 90s, early 2000s. I saw it with Madam Web as well. They don't do a good job of depicting people who were born in kind of like the mid to late 70s. What they would be like in the late 90s, early 2000s. They essentially just make them millennials. And they make them millennials in the sense of like that popular understanding of millennials that became kind of big in the mid 2000s, especially as corporate America was trying to replace older workers with millennials at that time. So there's this concept of a millennial that, most millennials don't fit that concept of a millennial, but it's what we think of when we say the word millennial, right? You think of this concept of this sort of this vacuous, image conscious, kind of, sort of I don't know, whifty kind of individual who orders a bunch of things on Prime and likes muted colors and muted fonts and everything like that, and doesn't really have any like strong sense of values or core or anything like that, right? That concept of the millennial, it obviously comes later, because a lot of these individuals have been born in like the mid to late 80s, going into like the early 90s, and so. Like, for example, there's the main character's at an office setting, and the person working at the office is trying to ask her out, not knowing that she's gay, and he's like using expressions like super fun, which we didn't use super as an adjective like that until later, and even like people my age would use super as an adjective later on, but it's not something that was done in 1999. It's just sort of this devolving into just like, it's almost as if like everything that happened in the late 90s was just the same as what would have happened in the late 2000s. That's essentially how they've kind of reduced it. Madam Web did the same thing, right? Like Dakota Johnson's character, she doesn't really seem like someone who was born in 1973, right? She seems like someone who was born in, I don't know, 1987, which she was, right? And I get too that it's hard for people who are younger to play people older. I mean, you think of Mad Men, right? You think of, when you watch Mad Men, it's like actors that were, essentially, they were born in the late 80s who are supposed to be playing people that were living in the 60s, and they're talking with vocal fry. And it's like, well, you can't use vocal fry in 1964, right? It doesn't work. And it's kind of what you see here with that. So the other thing I don't like is this reduction of the late 90s, early 2000s, and making it essentially what the later part of the 2000s is, but also not understanding who people born in like the mid to late 70s, especially people a little older than me. I think for my age cohort in the late 70s, we start to take on more of what we start to, we're kind of on that sliding scale of what starts to become millennials. But, people that were born in the early 70s or mid 70s, and these characters, I'm assuming they were, in their late 20s, early 30s in 1999, means they would have been born in the kind of early to mid 70s. They wouldn't have acted like millennials. They might act like millennials later, right? Because we all, everybody starts to pick up on millennial phrasing and speech and stuff like that later on. I mean, I had a boss who's a couple of years older than me who she would use super as an adjective the way that this character is, that it. Again, she wouldn't have been using it that way in 1999, but she was in 2014. And that's, I guess that's the other piece of it, right? Is that even older people start using expressions. I mean, I see people my age referring to songs as bangers or saying that something slaps, and it's like you sound like David Ogden Stiers and Better Off Dead when you talk like that. But it's just the reality, right? Is that people pick up these expressions that younger people use as time goes on. But this sort of didn't exist in the late 90s, and this approach or this way of acting or behaving didn't exist there. And I don't know how you make it authentic. I don't know how you make the late 90s authentic in a way that doesn't come off as like the 2010s or the late 2000s or 2010s. And I get, again, that they set it in that time period because they needed to, but yeah, I mean, I guess if I'm looking at this movie, Driveway Dolls, it was a fun movie, but yeah, don't set it in 1999 and don't set it in Philadelphia if you can't do the accent and if you can't get people that are more authentic. The other thing too, I guess, with Ethan Cohen and his wife is that they're older. Like, he was born in the 50s, she was born in the mid 60s, and older people, of course, reduce everybody younger than them to just being millennials. That's sort of the understanding of it. So, in their sense, they would have thought that these characters were coming off authentic because they would have just been like, well, they're all, they wouldn't think like, oh, somebody born in 73 is different from somebody born in 83 or somebody born in 93. Just they would kind of all be the same thing, right? Because they're all younger than me. I'm in my teens at that point or whatever they'd be thinking. So yeah, so those are my two kind of pet peeves there. But yeah, that's kind of my initial thought there. My rant is done. Yeah, why don't we we'll have John from After Movie Diner playing our theme song, and then when we come back, Mitch from Video Vacuum and I will be on to talk some Dolph Lundgren. All right, we are back, and I am joined once again by Mitch Lovell from the Video Vacuum. Welcome back, Mitch.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, now we are about to talk about Wanted Man. I keep wanting to call it The Wanted Man, but it's just Wanted Man, Dolph Lundgren movie. The last time that we talked Dolph, the last time you were on to talk Dolph, you've been on plenty of times in between then, but the last time that we talked Dolph was Altitude, I believe in 2020. Does that sound right?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was a few years old at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so it's been a little while. And we were talking, the last time that you were on, when we wrapped the episode, we're like, oh, what are some ideas for your next episode to come on? And Wanted Man at that time, it wasn't quite free streamer yet. It was like $1.99, I think, on Amazon, which we were like, okay, that's not so bad. Now it's fully free on Hulu, which I think is a good place for it.
Yeah, it kind of is a good fit. I think for that market, it kind of belongs in that kind of like elderly Liam Neeson-y kind of territory. I think it's a good fit for Hulu.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things we were talking about in 27, kind of in the late 2010s, early 2020s, is what you termed the Dolphissance, right? Where he was getting parts in Aquaman and doing all kinds of things. And I don't, he still is kind of doing that kind of stuff. But he's also doing a lot of these direct to video movies. Yeah, how are you kind of feeling about where he's at now?
Well, I mean, I just saw him on a commercial for like a video game. It was like Squad
Right? Yes.
Busters or something. So
Yes.
he's still, kind of popping up where you least expect him, which is a great thing for fans. I just happened to look at my phone because I never pay attention to the ads while I'm playing my games or whatever, and I was like, "Is that Dolph?" And then like I had to like look it up and watch, and like Chris Hemsworth and Christina Ricci. So he's in good company with starring in these kind of ads. I think his name, especially with Creed 2, I think that kind of brought a lot more attention to him, and people were like, yeah, he still has it. And I think anything to keep him in the zeitgeist is fine by me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I still haven't seen the new Aquaman. I've got to do that because it's on Max, so it's like I have HBO Max, so I should see it just to like check off another Dolph movie because that's really kind of So I mean, yes, the Aquaman thing too, but I don't know if you caught that one yet.
Yeah, and that was fun. Say what you will about some of the DC movies, at least the Aquaman movies kind of know what they are and kind of embrace some of the silly aspects. I mean, like I wouldn't say the second one's as good as the first one, but the first one has Dolph riding a giant seahorse, and I mean, so what, for us, I mean, that's like 3.5 stars right there. That's all you really need.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, because Aquaman was that one, 'cause, yeah, when I think of the DC cartoons growing up versus like the Marvel ones, Aquaman was that one where you were just like, because Hanna-Barbera did those DC ones a lot, so I was always kind of wondering how seriously I was supposed to take Aquaman when I was seeing him anyway. So, and I think Jason Momoa is a good person to play that Aquaman.
Yeah, and I think they have a pretty good hook for it. No pun intended with the fish thing,
Right?
uh, about like how we're damaging the ocean with
Yeah.
pollution and kind of they find ways to kind of sort of semi ground it and like okay, I can see why the Atlanteans would be at war with the humans because we're messing up their ocean. So it's just enough of that, but also like here's Dolph Lundgren arguing with a giant hermit crab man. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But it's one of the things that's going to be a little disappointing about this reboot that they're doing with the DC films because Dolph I've heard like with Momoa that they might use him for Lobo, one of their other DC characters was I remember collecting in the late 80s early 90s. Lobo was like kind of the one DC one that we still liked, at least amongst my friends. But I don't know where Dolph stands at that point, unfortunately. But it the fact that this is now he's been in two comic book movies. He's done the Punisher movies and now or the Punisher movie and then these ones. It at least speaks to that fact, like you said, that like he's still out there.
Yeah, and Yeah, it still goes without saying that, a lot of Marvel talent and DC they kind of go back and forth, like Ryan Reynolds being Green Lantern and Deadpool, Halle Berry being Storm and Catwoman. So I wouldn't write him off just yet. I mean, there might be room for him in a new uh, y- Marvel movie. I always thought that maybe not now because he's kind of entering his geriatric years. But I always thought he would have been a really good Crimson Dynamo if they had used him for the Iron Man movies. But whether that not that comes to pass, that's just fanboy casting right there.
Right. Well, because what they did with that second movie is that didn't they combine Crimson Dynamo with another with like Whiplash or
With
somebody, right? When
Whiplash,
they made
yeah,
the Rourke character.
yeah, they kind of did yeah, and for the as I'm not really kind of beholden to canon when they change things for the as long as it makes sense within the confines of the movie. I don't really, I it like like the I know people complain about the Green Goblin and Spider-Man looking like something from Power Rangers, but in the context of the movie, it makes more sense to be an armored suit than like a Halloween costume. So I'm like okay, well it just worked for the movie at hand, and I don't really have to dig out my comics and say, oh look, this is where you got everything wrong.
Right. No, that's a really great point. And I mean, one of the other ones that I had heard rumored was the Omega Red character from kind of Wolverine comics. And I think there was also like sort of like some X-Men, like when X-Men split into two books where it's Uncanny X-Men and just X-Men. He was, I think Omega Red was a baddie in those ones as well. And I mean, that would have been another fun one for him because I think he, even getting up in age, he could play that character because it would have been a lot of like probably CGI tentacles and things like that. But no word that they've added that character to the Deadpool Wolverine movie because that would have been perfect to have him in there.
Yeah, and and who knows with the whole multiverse thing. I mean, he might be able to even come back as Punisher.
It's Punisher.
That I mean that would be that would be like the cherry on top. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see for Deadpool.
Yeah, yeah. For people listening out there, there's I don't think there's anything we would want more than that. I honestly I can't even think of another. I mean, yes, JD Salinger or not JD Salinger. JD Salinger's the writer. His son is Matt Salinger. Yeah, JD Salinger was a play Captain America, but I mean that would be kind of a funny thing. Or the old Fantastic Four, like any of those ones. I think that, but I think out of all of them, Dolph would be the most fun.
Yeah, and I think one of the ones that he could legitimately pull off. Whereas the other one where would just kind of be like, well, maybe with the exception of like Wesley Snipes as Blade, but where it just wouldn't be gratuitous fan service. I think he could actually get in there and mix it up.
Yeah, I mean, I would even love if like with the with the Burnhall Punisher or yeah, the Burnhall's Punisher, where if there was like this idea of like the Burnhall's like reading about somebody who was doing the same stuff he was doing, 20 years before, I guess 30 years before now, right? Like we're
Yeah.
that much further back. But then and he goes and meets him and it's Dolph playing, that and it's like, oh yeah, and then he like helps him. It's almost like this idea of there were other Punishers in the past. Because one of the things about that Dolph Punisher is that he never wore the skull. So you could conceivably have him in the same universe, as they say, or he could be in the same world and just have been doing the same thing but not using the name. Like it could track, I guess, or it could go together.
Well, I mean the Spider-Man movie had Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland, so that why not bring Tom Jane in there too and get all three Punishers? So
Well, because that's the thing too with Thomas Jane's Punisher is that he did that short movie Dirty Laundry, and it's like, oh wow, he actually could have with the right material, this could be really good. And you kind of wonder with Disney, where they're kind of pulling back in terms of their content when it comes to like theatrical movies and also I think with TV shows, but like straight to streaming. And I don't know like what the margin is. Like I don't know how good a straight to streaming movie has to be for them to feel like it's worth it. But like a Punisher movie could be done for like $20 million, maybe 40, maybe it'll be too well. But like a Thomas Jane direct to Disney Plus Punisher would actually, I think, would be a really something that we would enjoy.
Right. And I think a lot of the criticism that was lobbed at Thomas Jane's Punisher was that he's not the Punisher until basically the last 10 minutes of the
Right.
movie. And that's just not the movie that I think the fans wanted to see. But if you watch the movie in context, just a standalone piece, it really works. And really, I think the movie that it's really kind of riffing on is Mad Max, with the death of the wife and the family and everything. And Mad Max isn't really Mad Max when you watch Mad Max until the last 10 minutes. He isn't really mad, and
Right.
I think that was. I don't think people really wanted an origin story for Punisher. I think they just wanted him out there and kicking ass. But again, if you just watch it as Joe moviegoer, I think it kicks a lot of ass, and I think it's underrated because people kind of come in with their own baggage.
Yeah, that's definitely true because, like, again, when you see him in Dirty Laundry, he does everything the way you want him to. But I think you're right. Like, I think the story overall, I think had that was for me. I think, yeah, I would have wanted him to be the Punisher right away. And I think the other thing too, yeah, with the Punisher origin story, I feel like his lends itself to kind of like a similar to like a Batman origin story where you can start the movie with him fully fleshed out as the hero who's like just going out and killing people, and then you can intersperse origin moments within like the story as it's going, so he can be this mysterious figure who's just killing baddies, and then like, oh well, where did he come from? Oh, it's because of this or it's that. And I think that's, you know I think that that's something that these movies could do better. I think they could, like like I was complaining about just origin stories in general as I'm sort of going a little off topic, but like there's so many movies, so many times they want to just do a whole origin story of a character, and I feel like Godfather 2 nailed it the best, where they did, you know modern story with Vito's origin story. Like I've joked, it's not, Vito a Godfather story, right? It's Godfather 2. And I think, I think to your point about the Punisher, it's the same idea that like you can do a fully fleshed out Punisher and then just intersperse parts of his origin.
Yeah, and they kind of did that too with the Dolph movie, where just kind of you get the breadcrumbs here and there, and I honestly think that just comes from old fashioned filmmaking and storytelling. Is like, well, we have to start at the beginning, and I think that's something they've kind of sort of gotten away from in some of these movies with that, especially when everybody's crossing over characters, especially like when you look at like the Marvels, like they didn't spend a whole lot of time on anybody else's origins because they were like, well, in this day and age, you can either watch 10 hours of a Disney Plus show, or you could just Google it before you go to the theater. And it just, you know, gets the ball rolling right away. And I think it's something that they've experimented enough where I think when it works, it does really work very well.
Yeah, well, and that's another good point. Like the Marvels, it's like, the only movie you really had to see, the only thing you had to see before the Marvels was Captain Marvel. That was, because it's a sequel, right? It's part two, so you got to see part one. The other characters, it wasn't necessary to know, because like for example, the other character, I guess her name was Ms. Marvel. Her Kamal Khan, like her character, you don't need to know her origin because you're getting enough of who she is just from the movie itself, right? It's like, okay, she lives with her family and she's young and her family's kind of kooky and they do kooky stuff. It's like, how much more do I need to know about her past for this movie to work? And I do kind of wonder if they, like, I think you had mentioned this before, that maybe they should have called the movie Captain Marvel to the Marvels. And if that might have synced people in more to like the rest of the stuff you don't necessarily need. You just need to have seen the first movie. That's, just like any sequel, just watch the first movie. The rest of it you don't necessarily need.
Right. And I think that's why only the real Marvel diehards turned out for that, as opposed to, just kind of like, people kind of turning out in droves for whatever kind of tentpole movie it is just because it has the Marvel name. And now there's so much content out there where people have to actually pause, be like, okay, wait, and they got to sit there and connect the dots before, going into the theater. But like I said, I think we're at that stage now where, especially with, we're just bombarded. Maybe not this year because it seems like I think we got more Sony Marvel movies than we do actual Marvel movies.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's I think I mean even when you look at something as kind of like tepid as Madam Web, uh, it doesn't make you say like, okay, well, you have to know everything about every Spider-Man alternate thing. It's very much its own thing, almost to the point where it's almost like a middle finger to any like comic book movie fan. But
Right.
like, it does its, and that's what I kind of respected about it. It was almost like, here's how you do a superhero movie without superheroes, and it was kind of like I think it was an unsuccessful experiment, but I'm glad they're at least trying to do something that's just not just like a retread of 100 other comic book movies.
Well, and to your point about the Punisher, right? The thing that really hurts Madam Web is the fact that we get these superheroes that aren't superheroes until the maybe not even the end of the movie, right? It's just sort of it's sort of teased that at some time, at some future point, they might be superheroes, but we're so far from that now that they're just kids in New York City in 2003. So there's that I think again, had they maybe interspersed, right? Like them being superheroes and fighting things and then their origin, it may have played out better.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not really defending Madam Web
Oh no.
really at all, but like I'm saying that yeah, it probably would have worked better with, a lot more Sydney Sweeney in a form-fitting latex, outfit. I would be all for that. But it was kind of like an interesting kind of experiment of being like, okay, it was almost more of like a Final Destination slash Next kind of movie than it was, a web slinging movie.
Yeah, I totally agree there. I mean, one of the things I think about that movie, so I didn't see that one in the theater. I saw it on Netflix after the fact. But it's the kind of movie that I think my friends and I, when I was, in the 90s in high school or maybe later in college or just out of college, when, people went to the movie theater more often, that's the kind of movie that we would have seen like like on a Saturday, like we're killing time for something else to do something else. We're like, okay, everybody's seen everything else in the theater. Let's see Madam Web, and we would have watched it, and maybe my friends would have been so. I mean, I can remember a few times where they were so upset that they burned their movie tickets because they didn't like the movie, and maybe they would have burned them after that or something. But now it's like a movie like that. Second Life is on Netflix. It's not like sort of like a second wave in the theater where everybody's seen everything else first and then they go see Madam Web. Um, but I kind of I agree with you that there was a little bit of bonkers going on in that film that I didn't hate it, I guess is maybe what I should say.
Yeah, it was like it was an experimental-ish kind of, way to, and I like too that, I think if, any sane movie executive was going to do a Spider-Man spinoff, like Madam Web might have been the 17th or 18th name to come up. So I think they had the power to kind of have a a, a character that, kind of so niche that you don't have to be beholden to her legacy or, worry about breaking canon or anything. You can just kind of attach it to whatever script was probably still lying around at the time for whatever movie, and they just kind of cobbled it together and threw it out. But at the same time, I appreciated that it wasn't like a generic carbon copy of everything else we've seen, but what we saw was, just weird enough to be memorable, but not exactly memorable enough to be a cult classic, if that's,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. Well, because that was the thing. I think I don't want to say I was disappointed to find out that it wasn't the worst comic book movie ever made, but I mean, I think that 2015 Fantastic Four movie is way worse than than Madam Web. But I mean, even looking at things like Catwoman, that the Halle Berry movie, it's like, Madam Web doesn't really touch those heights.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too that Madam Web, I think it took place in like 2003, and like it's almost like we're getting nostalgic for that first wave of like post Spider-Man
Yeah.
uh, movies that where nobody had the rights ironed out, and they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and it was like, oh well, Spider-Man made money, let's make Daredevil. What property do we have lying around that's like Spider-Man, and like that's how you get a Catwoman or like a kind of like even like a Man Thing, which that might be the worst, but it's just kind of interesting to that movies now are like almost wistful for that era and time where where like I was like I lived through that. There wasn't it was like it was as much of a grab bag as it is today. But it's funny that there's like the younger crowd has like a tinge of nostalgia for all that.
Yeah, because I noticed like Daredevil is on, because I guess it was a Fox movie, so now Disney has the rights. It's funny, they have Daredevil on Disney Plus. I think Elektra is on Max. And but the thing is too, like the streaming version of Elektra doesn't have the deleted scene that had Ben Affleck in it. So but yeah, you're right about that, because it's like when first we had Blade, which Blade was kind of more like the way comic book movies were done a lot. And Blade was almost like a Dark Horse comic book adaptation, where like, Dark Horse properties were being, bought up by studios, and they were making things like Barbed Wire and stuff like that. It's like, Blade was like a better version of that. And then, like you said, like you had X-Men and Spider-Man, and suddenly it was like what do we have that's like close to these? And the other funny thing about that era was that DC was almost completely out of it, and it was all Marvel at that time, when in the past it was the other way around, right? It was always DC that was doing stuff, and Marvel was kind of like chasing their tail with like, Albert Punn's Captain America and things like that.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting. People. Well, I mean, I think they had Batman, but it was such a self-contained universe that it didn't. It felt like that was the only game in town, unless you count like Steel or something.
Right.
Um, but like it seemed like Warner Brothers. I think they burned themselves out on Superman. I don't think they were really. I think they had set up Batman as okay. This is like the comic book property that we're just gonna kind of put all our eggs into this basket. And I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. I mean, we're 30 years away from that, which sounds weird to say, but in like the 90s, like when you look back, like the Batman, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, they were the really kind of only game in town for DC. And it's funny, and like how like Superman 4 and Batman 4 kind of like shot themselves in the foot. So it's funny because after that, like when they do Christopher Nolan's series, it's like, okay, it's a trilogy. Don't give us that fourth movie. We don't want that fourth movie, because every time we make a fourth movie, it turns out bad. Even though I like Batman and Robin because it's somehow campier than the 60s series, uh but you know what I mean. It was funny how everything had to be a trilogy. Yeah, it's Spider-Man had to be a trilogy. We don't want a fourth movie because we don't want another quest for peace on our hands.
Right. Well, right, because yeah, I mean, I agree with you on Batman and Robin. I mean, I feel like you can't go wrong with George Clooney in a suit or in a tux. But that and like you said, it is bonkers. I mean, bat nipples and Mr. Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze was just a lot of fun, and yeah, Uma Thurman. It's like Joel Schumacher, with like Lost Boys and all of that stuff, just saying like, just I don't know what happens there, but it's almost like he's just like sort of untethered and he just goes for it. And yeah, you're and you're right too that like the fourth Superman, right, was like almost a different thing where it was like they wanted to be done after number three. They were like, okay, we did three, we're done. And then Cannon's like, well, if we get the rights, let's just throw a whole bunch of money at Christopher Reeves and Gene Hackman and see if we can do something here. And then they get like some model from England to play Nuclear Man, and it's just like, here's what we got here. It's like a trip. I had heard that they were going to make a fourth Spider-Man, and what happened was. I think they were pushing Sam Raimi to make it faster than he wanted to, and he said, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to push it on that timeline. I want to make it I want to give it the time that it needs so it's good. I don't want to rush it." And they just said, "Fine, we'll just reboot it with Garfield," and they called it good there.
And who knows? There have been rumblings that he might actually make his fourth Spider-Man movie, because I mean, Tobey Maguire still looked like he was game when in No Way Home, so maybe that will actually happen. But I think it's interesting that, like, I think Schumacher's really, he wasn't really a comic book guy. I think he even said in one of the, even though he takes full blame and responsibility for Batman and Robin, I think he's just kind of beating people to the punch. I he I think his big frame of reference was the TV show, and I think the reason why uh, Forever is kind of darker, slightly, but I think he was trying to honor what Burton had did, and not make it such like a harsh juxtaposition. Like if you went from Batman Returns to Batman and Robin, you would be like, "Whoa, is this even?" So you have to have a little bit, and I think, Batman Forever, it has some flaw. I still enjoy it, but uh, it does. You kind of, it gradually gets you into the nuttiness of Batman and Robin.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because I think Schumacher. I mean, it's interesting because Tim Burton with his Batman, and then of course Batman Returns. They're like so different from what we understood comic book movies to be at that time. But like, I mean, I remember myself I guess I was 10, going to see the first Batman, expecting the old Batman series, and just being completely freaked out of my mind at what I was seeing there, in the theater. That's probably my most harrowing film theater experience was that one there. But you're right, because that movie had such an influence on comic book movies, because it was like, okay, we don't all want to be Superman now. Let's see what we can do about like making the movies darker. And so then it was like, Sam Raimi comes in with his Spider-Man, and he's still got kind of some of that darkness to it, but not the same level, which I thought was really good. I mean, some of these names that we have doing these movies back then are not the kind of names that you would see doing a movie like that now. I mean, I know Sam Raimi did the Doctor Strange, but like a Joel Schumacher as a director, I can't imagine like any of the major studios would let him do a big blockbuster comic book movie now.
Yeah, and I think at the time, I think one of the reasons why he was on their list was because he was good with like ensembles, like Flatliners, Lost Boys, St. Elmo's Fire. Like he was good with kind of wrangling all these kind of like big casts together, and that kind of I think that certainly holds true in both of the Batman movies, because they, even like, like having like John Glover and like smaller, like these kind of really kind of cool names in the smaller supporting roles. I think that really speaks to like his work with actors. And even though, yes, they're making these campy Batman movies, but you still have someone to show up and pull it off.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at his career just as Schumacher. I mean, I always thought of him when I think of the '80s movies. It was almost like it was like him and Penelope Spheris that were like making a lot of the stuff that I remember at that time. That was just like, I don't know. It was the kind of movies that were like, they weren't like major, big budget. They weren't like the most popular things. Like they weren't the kind of things that were like TNT new classics. They were kind of more like these slightly other things. I mean, I think Penelope Spears, I think she did the Wayne's World movies, and that kind of stuff too. They were two names that I know. When he passed away, it was like, man, those were two names that I would be curious to see, like what he would have done in this modern film environment.
Yeah, and I think he's one of those guys that kind of has like I don't know if like chameleon is kind of the word
Yeah.
for it, but like whatever genre he's doing, his style kind of just suits the material. He doesn't kind of come in and have like any kind of really signature trademarks that I can think of. But like when he does like phone booth, he's like very, almost Hitchcockian, a lot of you know, kind of just like a very kind of ticking time bomb kind of situations and letting the suspense play. It's similar to like Falling Down. Falling Down's like a more gritty kind of throwback to the 70s kind of movies. And then you have Batman and Robin, which is like a living cartoon. So I think he's one of those guys that just presents the material instead of puts a stamp on the material. And I think a lot of, you know, a lot can be said for people that, when you watch a De Palma movie, it's, oh, that's a De Palma movie. But I think there's a lot to be said for people who just kind of don't let their style get in the way of the material.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one of his last movies, actually, it was his last movie. Now it was the Nicolas Cage, Nicole Kidman. I guess it was kind of direct to video Trespass, which I had a lot of fun with that one. I don't think at the time I knew it was going to be his last movie. But and like you said, it's like I think like he'd worked with Cage before on 8 millimeter, but yeah, like you watch that one, and it like you said, it has kind of a more of a Hitchcockian feel to it. And maybe even De Palma. You could even put De Palma in there with that movie. But you're right that like it's not like it's not like you're watching it and it has to be. You wouldn't know that it's a Joel Schumacher movie unless you looked on the credits and saw that it was him.
Right. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Like, he can make movies as different as Phantom of the Opera and 8 millimeter.
Yeah.
That are just kind of almost like polar opposites and still pull them off and make them almost like uh, you know, I won't say like, he has an invisible hand, but like the way that uh he's delivering the story, it's like drawing you in without kind of any kind of superfluous kind of directorial flourishes.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like because of that sense that he has, uh, it it would be interesting to see someone with his sensibilities doing modern comic book movies, like we talked about, like with like maybe like those Thomas Jane, Punisher, Disney Plus movies. That that he's that kind of a director that it would have been interesting to see kind of what he did within this new, or I mean, I don't think he would have gotten his chance with these big blockbuster movies, but it would have been interesting to see, if there's kind of we were talking about with Dolph, being able to be in Aquaman as almost like kind of a redemption for that Punisher movie that we enjoy, but he didn't really get to do anything comic book wise after that, and he finally gets that shot again. It would have been interesting to see Joel Schumacher get a chance at one of these movies.
And it's kind of interesting when you kind of think of Dolph, like, his look and his physique. Like, if you have to wonder if they made a Aquaman movie in like, 91, 92, he would have made a great Aquaman. Like if they made it, say, like, around the time of like Universal Soldier, with the blonde hair, the orange chainmail or whatever. I mean, I can totally envision him being if they had made like a B-lister kind of companion piece to one of the Batman movies.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to think about, right? With DC, where they like you said, like they kind of they did Superman first, and then they were done with Superman. They do Batman, that's it, just Batman, and it was almost like Marvel pushed them to start pulling out their other characters. It was like, Aquaman had been there for years. I mean, Wonder Woman, right? We grew up with the Wonder Woman TV show and, reruns, or, was on, maybe kind of the end of its run. And granted, that's a little bit campy as well. I mean, I don't think it ever gets old seeing Linda Carter flying the invisible plane. That was just, all great stuff there. But, they've always had these great characters, and it's almost like they just don't know what to do with them. I mean, granted, we're talking about Ryan Reynolds with the Green Lantern movie. It's like they just, here he is like killing it as Deadpool, and then that Green Lantern movie is another one that's considered one of the poorer comic book movies ever. Yeah, it's kind of a shame that, like, I don't know what was going on at Warner at that time, that people weren't just like, hey, why don't we make all of these characters? Why are we just sticking with Batman? And but that was what they did.
Yeah, and then I think, Batman Begins is a hit, and then, they're like testing the waters with Superman Returns, which, really didn't do as well as they had anticipated. But by that time, they're already on Marvel's already on like the third X-Men movie and making spin-offs with Wolverine, and we're right on that cusp of the MCU. And again, it seems like Batman, the Nolan version, is the only game in town. And I don't know if it's just because that's what's familiar, that's just what they know, what the marketing department is comfortable with, But it was kind of interesting. But we also forget too that Iron Man and Incredible Hulk were a big roll of the dice. Nobody really had any idea. Not so much Incredible Hulk, but like nobody knew Iron Man was going to be Iron Man. We look back now, we're like, oh yeah, that sounds like a no-brainer. But Robert Downey Jr. couldn't even get insured because of his
Right.
previous incarnation, we'll say. But like, it seems like a no-brainer now. But like, back then it was, we were just happy that like, oh, they're kind of making it like sort of like the comic book. Okay, that's kind of cool. And oh, there's a possibility that it was even like, hey, if you go see Incredible Hulk, you might see Iron Man, and we're really there. That kind of you know Batman had said something about Superman and uh, Batman and Robin, but there wasn't, them together on screen before. So, and it's kind of funny too, because by the time they actually get to Justice League, DC had already shot itself in the foot anyway by that point, by the time they actually got all the guys together.
Right. Well, because if when you look at it, right, because I guess it was Kevin Feige, who he's about our age, who when because obviously, like you had talked about, right, there was that free for all period in the late 90s, early 2000s, where like properties were just getting sold off, all, so 20th Century Fox had certain ones, Universal had ones, and they all kind of different ones. And it was one of those things where Kevin Feige looked at it and said, like, the ones that we actually own, we could do the Avengers with these ones, right? Because it was like they had everybody but the Incredible Hulk, but then like with Hulk, they had the ability to, like, they were going to work with Universal, I guess, to make that movie with him. But when you look at it from a timeline standpoint, like you said, it actually it makes a lot of sense when you think about it that way. Like how, okay, so Batman Begins comes out, and then The Dark Knight, right? And The Dark Knight is like the kind of the biggest grossing comic book movie of all time, right? It pulls over $1 billion. And at that point, DC's thinking like, okay, we got this, right? We're the king of the game here. Yeah, Marvel can do whatever they want with all these movies, but we've got this. By the time the third of that trilogy comes out, Avengers is now the number one film, right? Avengers beats out. I think Avengers was number one. I think it was like number four that year was The Dark Knight Rises. And they were like, now they had to scramble, right, to kind of catch back up, and like, okay, we got this Man of Steel movie we had come out. Let's see if we can put him together with Batman and bring in Wonder. It was like they were kind of scrambling to do it, and they never quite had it together. The way Kevin Feige was like mapping these things out, this Marvel Cinematic Universe, and and granted now it's kind of getting a little all over the place there, but at least for those first that first one or two phases of it, they were like really really killing it.
Yeah, and it just felt like DC was in catch-up mode, like you said. And by the time they make one movie, Marvel's made like five,
Right.
and they're all interconnected, and they're all and all the fanboys and fangirls were all about it because we had never seen that, on the screen depicted the way it was. And they still had kind of, and in Warner's defense, they have Christopher Nolan. They're going to let him do whatever he wants to do, regardless, because, I think not so much, the Dark Knight Rises, but the first two Batman of his Batman movies hold up as movies first and then comic book movies. And that's not to take anything away from Rises because it's a very good comic book movie, but it's just, I don't think it's quite there with the one and two. But um but it is kind of funny that, like, as soon as he leaves the Batcave, they pull up Ben Affleck, and they're throwing money at him. So
Right. Well, because they knew at that point, they were like, oh boy, we're in trouble here because yeah, I mean, essentially, whereas DC was dominant there. I mean, yes, there was that period where Marvel was dominant, where you had the Spider-Man film, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. But really, DC comes back in with those Nolan Batmans, and they take back over. And I think there was a sense that their way of doing it was going to be the thing that would work. And so you can't blame them. Like you said, they've got Christopher Nolan making these movies. They're fantastic. They're pulling in tons of money. And then, Marvel just suddenly is just this ragtag bunch of, like you said, like Robert Downey Jr., who can't get insured, and who's this Australian guy who's playing Thor, and Chris Evans is coming in as Captain America. And I mean, that Captain America movie itself was just so ridiculous. Where I mean, they set the entire thing in the 1940s and did it well. It was like a great, like, fun period piece. And it's like, from DC's standpoint, they're probably looking at that like going like, how do we do that? Like, where did that go? So of course they ended up making Wonder Woman the same way, like having that be a period piece. But yeah, it is one of those things, that first phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the way it changed everything. And it'll be interesting to see kind of, I guess with our guy Dolph here, as we kind of, sort of, coming back into him here, like, as this sort of this new phase of comic book movies comes in, where Marvel and DC are doing different things. It'll be interesting to see a guy like Dolph, like, where he fits in with that.
yeah, like I said, and you know, guys like you and me will watch him whether he's in a direct-to-video movie or if he's in a $200 million comic book movie. And I think right now I don't know if I would use the term he's as great as he's ever been, but he still has plenty of gas in the tank. And even when he's not on his best day, like he was in Wanted Man, that won't stop somebody like from you and me from watching it.
Right, exactly. And I think for the the major, studios out there. I mean, I think, for example, Warner Brothers is going through all this turmoil right now with David Zaslav, who's like kind of banking on when the merger happened between Discovery and Time Warner, HBO, or whatever. He was banking on just like, let's just keep doing these reality shows with, like, fundamentalist Christians and 19 kids, or polygamous relationships with sister wives and all that stuff. Like, let's just do that. We don't need to do any of this other stuff. And now he's realizing, like, oh no, we're kind of screwed if we don't do this other stuff. Like, hey, Dolph riding a seahorse is always going to be a moneymaker. So we can't ever go wrong with that.
Well, and he buried the Batgirl movie, which,
Right.
before, Flash, that was Michael Keaton's return to Batman. And, like, if you're gonna bury Michael Keaton's Batman, does that really show how much you really know about what the fans want? And even if it was just going to be a straight to streaming movie, uh yeah, like we want that. We want Michael Keaton back. And it just, and so it makes me kind of hopeful that, James Gunn and Peter Safran, uh they seem to be, like, pretty good about kind of keeping him away from the DC universe now.
Right.
Um, I'm trying to put that diplomatically as possible. I think they've got it so that it's their own thing, and it'll be kind of interesting because apparently they want, if he's Superman in the movie, he's going to be Superman's voice on the video games and the animated show, and to keep that really strict sense of continuity. And I know they're going to be doing the Robert Pattinson Batman movies under the Elseworlds banner or whatever. But it'd be very interesting to see how a rigidly like such a rigid continuity will work in a multi media format.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really great point because, because one of the things I think, we've talked about this before, I think on here, where it's like, when you go to like the comic book store, as a kid, like Spider-Man would have like 4 books, or X-Men would have like 5 or 6 different books, and they wouldn't. There would be some continuity with them, but sometimes it would also be like kind of a one-off. Like this is a one-shot story featuring these characters, and I feel like there's a place for that. And I think, like you said, with this Elseworlds with the Batman thing, I think that definitely works there as well. And but like, yeah, I mean, Warner killed Supergirl in the '80s because Superman 3 didn't do well. But somebody grabbed it. Somebody got a hold of it and released it anyway. It wasn't the version that they had originally planned for. I think there's a director's cut out now. But you wonder, like for example, with Batgirl. I mean, how does that work? Like if you get the tax write-off, you can never release it because you've gotten the tax write-off. Do you have to give the tax write-off back if you end up releasing it? I don't know how that works.
Well, from what I understand, they can never ever release it because the government, I guess, technically owns it, which would mean to me that the people own it, that it should be in public domain, and that it should be free on Tubi and archive.com and every place else. But I don't think they're going to let that happen.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Like, from a government standpoint, like it would be great, if that's what happened with these tax write-off movies. If the government just released them, and suddenly, like they're making money, to like maybe whatever money you make off that, you can use it for grants to get like more independent films out there or something like that. Yeah, it would be, but like you said, put it on Tubi, or even if it was just on Max. I mean, I don't know what the worst thing in the world would have been about having that on Max. That just having it as more content that would make people want to subscribe. Or now what they're doing, right, is that they're selling, or they're leasing their movies to other streaming sites. I'm sure Netflix would have loved to have had Batgirl on there.
Yeah, and it's one of those, and sadly, I think it really all it did was uh it's like a publicity stunt.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we buried Batgirl. Now everybody's talking about Warner Brothers. Everybody knows who David Zaslav is, and who, like, Joe Average probably can't name all the CEOs of all the companies, but they know him because he's the guy that buried Batgirl. So now it's like you can put a face to the name, and now and it's very um like I said, I just ultimately I think it wound up just being a very expensive publicity stunt.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And yeah, it is kind of too bad that, like, again, like you said, they buried Supergirl. They did finally release it. I think Trimark ended up getting it from them and releasing. I mean that's another piece of it. It's like, it would be interesting. I mean, what would be fascinating is if like Disney bought the rights to it and released it, and it was like, oh, hey, look at, here's Disney with releasing a DC movie or something like that. But it it's a scary, because I think with Disney, right? Disney's the other way around. Like, it's not that Disney shelves projects; they vault things where it's like, characters that you want to see again. It's like you don't see them ever. Like they never use them again. So it's like, I wonder which is worse, right? Because at least there's that idea that it could potentially be released sometime. That the Batgirl may see the light of day at some point. Whereas like with Disney, you're like, oh, are you ever going to use that character again? Are you ever going to, or are we ever going to see whoever, Luke Cage or somebody like that?
And I think ultimately that's what kind of has made the streaming era a little disappointing, because they made it seem like, oh, like everything in the Disney Vault will be available to you on Disney Plus, and then it's just like every other streaming service. You got the same set titles every month, and sometimes they get rotated in, sometimes other uh, titles get rotated out, and it would. I think, at least I thought, like, in the beginning, when we started going into this Wild West territory of streaming, that like there would be a little bit more variety with companies as vast as Disney, or even Warner Brothers with Max, and then now we're seeing that they're all leeching off of each other's content and partnering up. So, just to keep the lights on. And I'm like, well, I, isn't all this crap in your vault? Can't you just like show it to us? If we're paying you all this money, and now you're giving us the same 10 movies that I can find anywhere else on any other streaming.
Right, right. I mean, it's like I think Logan, which I still haven't seen. I got to see that one, that the Wolverine one. I think I've seen that one pop up on three different streamers now. I think it's on net. I don't know which one. I'm obviously it's on Disney Plus, but I think I've seen it pop up on Max. I'm wondering. I feel like I may have seen it pop up on Netflix as well, because Netflix is getting some of these movies again. I mean, that's the weird thing, right? Is that all of these major studios, they wanted to take their product away from Netflix, and now they have to go back to Netflix and be like, "Hey, do you mind showing our movies again? Can you give us some money to show our movies again?"
Yeah, and then you still have, cable in the midst of it, and I think that complicates things because they promise certain titles to cable, but then certain cable companies have streamers. So when
Right.
say, I don't know, Fox, who is now Disney, has a movie on Showtime, it also shows up on Showtime in addition to Max. You know what? And I think cable kind of muddies the waters a little bit.
Well, right, because cable's big issue is that these streamers are double dipping, right? Because the streamers are saying like Disney, for example, goes to Comcast and says, "Well, you got to pay out the nose for ESPN if you want to keep ESPN." But yes, we actually show our ESPN stuff on ESPN Plus as well. And Comcast is like, "Well, you know what? Everybody's cutting the cord with us anyway, so fine. We don't need ESPN unless you if you really for us to take ESPN, we're gonna pay less for it, because all we're getting right now are people just doing internet with us, so it doesn't matter. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we can't bilk the cable companies anymore for that. It's like, well, if you just had your stuff either on cable or streaming as opposed to both, then you'd have something to sell to the cable companies. Now the cable companies are like, yeah, we're not going to let you double dip like that anymore.
Yeah, and that was kind of the one of the allures of streaming, where you could just choose what you wanted instead of signing up with cable, having 350 channels and only watching 17 of them.
Right. Right. Well, because that's the idea, right? The whole
This you could
point.
just get the ones you want to see, and yeah, and then
Oh, go ahead. I think it cut out for a second.
uh, and another thing that irritates me, not even remotely related, like even like MLB.com has blackouts on local stuff. I'm like, it's .com. It's like I could get a VPN or whatever, but it's just a principle
Yeah.
that I like. If I'm gonna pay money for Major League Baseball, that should be Major League. That's baseball. That's all the baseball, and not all the teams except the one I want to watch.
Right. Exactly. Well, right, because that's the thing, right? Is that if you get the like my friend who lives in Cincinnati, right? He doesn't have cable, and so he can't watch the Reds. And then I remember, so what I usually do with MLB is I will, because I like my Red Sox here in Philadelphia. I'll wait until after the All-Star break. They do like a cheap like $30 thing. And so it's
Right.
funny because like I watch his Reds games, because I'll watch kind of any baseball game. And so I'm watching. I was like, oh, I watched the Reds. He's like, oh, you get to see them, but I don't, because if I get the MLB package, it's blocked for me.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Like it's like this is the 21st century. We still have blackouts. Like I don't. It's one of those things, one of those hot button issues. I just had to get out.
Yeah, no, well, because like, here in Philadelphia, the way, so if you have cable, you can stream the games on the app for the baseball, the local channel. But I guess they are, because I mean, there's a huge mess right now with the local broadcast rights, where like Sinclair Media bought up all of the ones from like Disney and Fox that they had. So for people listening, especially if you're outside the U.S., you probably don't really understand how any of this works. But like the way sports works in America is you've got national games, but then most of the games are shot locally in your area, and the teams make a ton of money off the local channels paying for the rights to show those games. And yeah, Sinclair Media, they bought up billions of, spent billions of dollars buying them up all across the country, and now they're bankrupt. And so like there are teams, I think in like in Florida and areas like that, I think because the Sinclair Media, they had an issue with Comcast or something like that. So there are people who can't even watch their games at all because they're not available on their local cable channel either because of the conflict with it. So I think they're realizing they're gonna have to do something new completely. But what that is, I don't know. Maybe it's gonna be like MLS on Apple Plus, where you gotta subscribe to Apple Plus to get all your baseball games.
Yeah, and which makes no sense because that's why the MLB.com
Right,
app exists. So it's just infuriating where it's just like around. It is similar, but not quite. But to the streaming content being like a round robin of like it used to be like once Netflix had Friends, they had Friends for a year, you got that time to watch it, or they get Seinfeld. And then now it just seems like and I think too, like once places like Netflix and AMC and even not so much Tubi, because they know their stock and trade, but whenever they start churning out that original programming, that muddies the water too, because they're promoting that and they're not really bringing in that third party content. But it's always hilarious to me whenever we pull up Netflix and the number one watched movie is some movie from 1997 that's been on TNT 10,000 times. Right. It's like, really, like you paid the rights to like $300 million to make Stranger Things the final season, and freaking Hope Floats is the number one movie on Netflix or whatever.
Right, exactly. Because I think that's what it is. I think one of the things with Netflix, with a lot of these streamers, like like I've been watching The Bear on FX, or on Hulu rather, streaming on Hulu, and that's part of it too, right? Is that Hulu, because it's owned by Disney. It was originally part of Fox, but now it's Disney. I guess it was ABC, Fox, and NBC. I guess they all three of them. So now Disney owns 2/3 of it. So they show their stuff on there. But yeah, it's like because it takes place in Chicago. I was like, well, my favorite show takes place in Chicago is the Bob Newhart show. I'd kind of like to watch some Bob Newhart episodes, and I thought those were on Hulu too, but no, they took them down. They have Mary Tyler Moore, but not Bob Newhart. And Bob Newhart's not anywhere. Like nobody has Bob Newhart. Like I can only get like the first 3 seasons on Amazon if I want to buy them for streaming. So you have to get like this box set. And so it's weird, and I guess it's probably a niche thing to want to watch Bob Newhart, but like you said, that's kind of part of the allure of streaming. Is it's supposed to be like, if I want to watch a Bob Newhart episode that I've got in my head, I should be able to just pull it up somewhere if I'm subscribed to something.
Right, and ultimately, physical media is the way to go, and it's kind of sad to say because I still have hundreds, thousands of DVDs and videos and Blu-rays and all that. And maybe I watch them once or twice, but like when me and my daughter would, my daughter will come in and be like, hey, do you have X movie? I'm like, yeah, I got that movie. And I can pull it off the show. I don't have to go searching or, finding it on an app or, buying something off of, Voodoo or something. I just go to my shelf, I pull it off, I pop it in the player, and we watch the movie.
Yeah, and it'll always be there, right? Because you've got the copy of it. And so yeah, I'm thinking I'm gonna probably have to break down and do the same thing. The problem with the DVD is that with TV shows like Bob Newhart, I like to just kind of watch those on a tablet or something if I'm traveling, and there's no way to do that if it's on DVD. So unless Apple at some point creates a DVD player that you can hook up to your tablet when you're traveling, because I was like, I'm going to probably have to break down, because just like you said, just so I can say I've always got every episode of Bob Newhart whenever I need one.
Yeah, and that's the thing too with that there are a lot of TV series that when I buy, I might not watch the entire thing. But whenever, I think I got to season 3 of the Rockford Files, whenever I get the itch to watch Jim Rockford, you just get, it's like, Lay's potato chips. You just can't watch one. So, you just, and it was funny, like, in the 2000s when people start saying binge watching, I'm like, what the hell is binge watching? That's why you watch like an entire series in one thing. Like, I call that watching. Like, there's no binge. That's what I do. That's my habit anyway. But yeah, but so, like, and then sometimes, like, I'll put like a little post-it note in there, like, season 2, like, episode 18 or whatever, and then I'll come back and start watching them all again. But like you said, it's like a book. It's like, and sometimes it's like a reference material. You just stick it on the shelf and you want to know something or you want to see something, you just pull it off the shelf and there it is.
Yeah, well, like for example, like if you had, WKRP, right? If you had that on DVD or whatever, right? Like at least for me, like if I had that on DVD, I probably wouldn't watch it much, right? But it's like I know every Thanksgiving I would watch the Turkeys Away, where Les is throwing turkeys. He's like, I thought turkeys could fly. It's like, I mean, that's just like such a class. Speaking of Cincinnati again, we're back on Cincinnati, right. But you're talking about the Rockford Files. I think of like an episode like where like Isaac Hayes was on, calling him Rockfish, and it's like, oh, like I want to see that one of those episodes again, or certain ones that my friends and I would talk because we used to watch it on an A&E when we were in high school, and I remember that episode. Like something might remind you of an episode, and it's like to be able to just pull it, from and watch it at any point. There's a little peace of mind in that.
Yeah, or you'll be perusing somebody's IMDb page, and you'll be like, oh, that guy was on the Rockford Files when he was like 20 years, like James Woods or something. I think he was like on
James Woods, when he was younger,
right? Yeah, and you go and you're like, holy shit, it's James Woods, like, yeah, like, and he's like, yeah, it looks like he's like a teenager, and that's always kind of like the allure to the Rockford Files. They always had really great guest casts, and a lot of times way before anybody knew who they were.
Yeah. It is one of those things where it, like as we're kind of getting into our Dolph here, where he's on Hulu here on Wanted Man. It's one of those things where like, okay, Hulu, Wanted Man, it's on Hulu. We don't know how long it's going to exist on Hulu, and I don't even know if you can even buy that as a DVD, if it even has a let me see if it says more purchase op. I don't even know if it came out on something other than streaming. So some of these ones nowadays are right, that this is the only way you can get them is it's on Hulu, and you've got it for that long. I'm just kind of checking while we're chatting here, but I don't think it's it's on Blu-ray for $35. Okay, so you actually can. Yeah, can you imagine paying $35? Oh, it's actually an import from Denmark, so okay. It's not the real deal. So it's not the Wanted Man. There is,
somebody,
I guess,
probably ripped it from streaming and then is selling it on a bootleg.
Right? Yeah, because okay, so yeah, it looks like there's non-USA formats, and then Prime. You can rent it on Prime if you don't have Hulu. So I mean that's the other thing now with these new Dolph. Because I used to buy every Dolph movie when it came out. That's like the first thing I went through my old bins, and I was surprised at some of the ones I had. Like I think I had like a Direct Contact. I was like, when did I buy Direct Contact? I don't remember that. But now now you're lucky if they even appear. But I guess as one of the things I think in Europe they're bigger on these movies getting released. There's more of a market for them on whereas here it's like maybe an end cap on Target might have like a Wanted Man mixed in with like the new Flash and that kind of thing.
Right. And I mean, up to a few years ago, I don't know if it's still the case now, but even movies like Wanted Man would be playing theatrically over there as well. So I don't know how much the theatrical market's changed over there, but I know even like the Seagal movies would play theatrically over there.
Yeah, because that was a big part of Randall Emmett, the producer. That was a big part of his business model, right? Was that he would make a movie on the cheap, only pay the big name, like whether it's Willis or Seagal, knowing that there was a market in Europe for in the theater for those movies. So here in the U.S., it would just be direct to video, and they'd make whatever they make from it. But that in Europe, it's like, okay, and Dolph's another big one, right? Dolph was a huge star in Europe, and it was like, just putting Dolph on the cover with, like you said, here in America, that would be a direct to video movie, or it might get a very extremely limited release. I remember Acceleration played at I think it was in a suburban theater here near Philadelphia. I missed it because it was one of those deals where you see on IMDb it tells you it's playing there, and then when you click, you find out it was playing there a week ago, and they just left it up because that's how it is. But yeah, the money is made like overseas, and I think that's probably a part of the problems. I think that market has dried up some, and that's why they aren't making them with the same budgets that they made before because there isn't that international market like they used to have.
Well, and I think movies like Wanted Man too are like that market, that audience doesn't change much. And I think people like you and me, uh and all the Dolph fans out there, like when we see, check his IMDb, we see he's got a new one out, we just go, we find it, and whether it's streaming or whether it's we got to pay like $3.99 on YouTube or something. Where there's a will, there's a way. We'll find it somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're gonna watch this, whichever way we can watch. I will say one of the fun things was seeing Expendables. Is there Expendable 4? I don't know if we should call it, but seeing that one in the theater and be like, oh, I haven't seen Dolph on the big screen in a while because I didn't catch Aquaman in the theater. So I can't remember the last time I'd seen him on the big screen. So it was kind of fun to be like, oh, there's Dolph there, and it wasn't in the best shape for that movie, but it was still kind of a cool thing. So even for us, right? Like, there's still, I don't know. Again, I don't know what the market is for that kind of things. I know, I watched this movie Cinderella's Revenge at uh, a major theaters, like a Regal theater in the suburbs, and I do wonder, like, if there is some advantage to having these movies just play for just like a little bit, if they can get a screen or two in a major theater for even just like for a week or two, like if that helps, like just getting the word out about them.
Well, I know in the old days, a lot of the video companies wouldn't touch a direct-to-video movie,
Yeah.
but if you had put it in four screens in, Ohio somewhere, or you're wherever, and it played for 2 weeks and it made $10,000 or whatever, it's a theatrical movie.
Right.
And that's how they would get around a lot of those. That's why some of uh, and I don't think they do it as much anymore, but I think, like, I think Fathom Events is kind of like an avenue of, like, if people want to see it on the big screen, that's your shot. It's usually one night or two nights only, for, like, something like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, for
Right.
example. The people that want to see that on the big screen, they'll go see that on the big screen. I was one of them. Yeah, but, like, yeah, and I think that gives you that theatrical experience. But I mean, right, the way the market is, I don't know if they still have those kind of like loopholes where it had to have a theatrical release before going to video or not.
So I guess what it is now with that kind of thing is that I was reading this that apparently for the streamers, they find that their movies do better if they had some kind of theatrical release. So that's like that's one piece of it, is that kind of helps. I guess also for awards, right? So like when The Irishman was strictly, it was essentially direct to Netflix, but they released it in the theaters for a short period of time just so it would be Oscar, worthy for Oscar nominations. So there's that part of it too. And then, I think there's also some benefit in the fact that, like, I know when I went to that Regal theater, Cinderella's Revenge had its poster next to where the theater was to watch it in. And so people going to see like the Ghostbusters movie that was out at that time, or the Fall Guy or whatever, and I guess not a lot of people saw the Fall Guy, but whatever they were going to see at that time, they would see that poster for Cinderella's Revenge and think, maybe I'll watch that at some point. Maybe I'll, keep, or later on when they're scrolling through too, be like, oh, Cinderella's Revenge, I remember that one at the theater there. Maybe I'll check that out.
Right, and it's kind of like the impulse aisle at the grocery store, like, the bubble yum, right? Right, it's like, oh, maybe I'll see Cinderella's Revenge. I don't need to see Cinderella's Revenge, but yeah, okay, let's go see it. Yeah, it's kind of like
Yeah.
that same mentality.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's and I mean, to be honest, like, I think with the way the film industry is now, between the fact that like you've got the streamers and they've kind of, I don't, like you said, they're sort of poaching from each other. They're like there's sort of that roulette wheel of like what's going to be there, what's not. Where does the ball land, and does it land on double zeros and we get nothing? But that kind of thing. But then also with the movie theater, I think part of the thing with the theater now is that um, it's not as easy to go to the theater as it used to be, and it's not as many people go as much, and it's like kind of a big thing, like, oh, when am I going to find the time to go to this theater and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, almost like, I don't know, it's like the movie industry has to kind of find more ways to just to get more people to make it kind of an event thing to do. Like, okay, what am I going to do on a Saturday night? Am I going to stay in and watch a movie, or is it worth it for me to go out and see the movie instead?
And I mean, also, the theater is still the best way to see a movie. And if people want to see that movie and they want to see it on the big screen, that they'll find a way to do it. And it's just like, when they sometimes like around Halloween, they'll start, kind of putting out stuff like Terrifier 2 or, movies that have been, that are readily available to stream, but fans will go to see it on the big screen, to be amongst other fans that and kind of hoot and holler and have like a communal experience as opposed to see it at home on the couch.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's another point. I mean, I think like with the Marvel movies and what we may have seen there is that I think that kids who were like in their early 20s in the late 2000s who kind of were like, I'm just going to go see every Marvel movie that's out. Now in 2023, those kids are now in their mid to late 30s. They've got young kids probably. They probably maybe had their first one or two kids. So it's like hard to like, okay, do I get a sitter? And as they're kind of working that all out, they're like, okay, well, what Marvel movies are coming out this year? Okay, Guardians of the Galaxy is the one we're going to see in the theater. The Marvels and whatever else that they had that year. Those are, well, I think it was an Ant-Man movie. We'll see those when they come out on Disney Plus, because we're paying for Disney Plus anyway. Why don't we make sure we see those? And I think that's the thing, right? Is that you have more movies that make people, when they're looking at the thing, saying like, okay, yeah, these are the ones we'll get a sitter for. And then, I think it also helped too with the young teen population. They'll make money as babysitters.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny too, because that generation just takes all that cross appearances and stuff for granted, because it's just like, hey, look, all these Marvel characters are always in somebody else's Marvel movie and stuff. And guys like you and me are like, no, like it was never like that, and you have to prove it. Yeah, we're like old man yells at cloud. They're like, in my day, Ant-Man would never have been on the same screen as Captain America. So
Right.
it's funny, like these kids just think it. Oh God, like it's just so easy to put all your superheroes in one movie.
Right, right, because you think about it, right? Like, I mean, even just like with Daredevil, with Punisher, where like when yeah, I guess they with the TV shows on Netflix, when they brought the Punisher in, they were like, okay, well, we've got Daredevil. What are we gonna do for our second season of Daredevil? Oh, we'll use the Punisher. And it's like the idea of that, right? For us would be unfathomable that you would say like, oh, what are we gonna do for our second season of Daredevil? We're going to put in the Punisher. It's like, no, those two, the fact that the Daredevil was even in a Hulk movie, right, was a big enough deal for us.
Oh yeah, I mean, I stayed up and watched that when I was a kid. That was that. And then when he's got just like the black lycra outfit, you're like, huh.
Yes, right.
Could get the red outfit, could you? Huh.
Right,
All right.
exactly.
Well,
Right, it was like, right, because that was the thing too with when they made these things, right, is that they never made them exactly the way I guess that was the other thing that Marvel with the Marvel Cinematic Universe nailed, is that they didn't just give us the characters, they gave us the versions that we wanted of those characters, which I think that's the other thing, is that like, like you said, we got that version of Daredevil we got in the Trial of the Incredible Hulk was not the one that we wanted, but we were happy enough that if he was going to be defended in court, that it was Matt Murdock doing it.
right, because whenever Spider-Man or Fantastic Four needed a lawyer, they went to Matt Murdock, and
Right.
whenever somebody needed some lab equipment tested, they go to Dr. Bruce Banner. So it was always kind of uh, it was just all their characters are readily available to them, and now that the rights are such a way that they can actually do that. I mean, in 2008, it kind of blew our minds, but now, I mean, we take it for granted, but now we're still like, okay, we still got to do it the right way.
Right, exactly, which is a great point as well. Well, yeah. Well, what do we do? This we'll take a break here, and then we'll get stuck in on Wanted Man. So we'll be back here in just a bit. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former special forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. All right, we are back, and yeah, we're about to get stuck in here on Wanted Man. So this is a movie that's kind of been in the hop or been in production for a long time. I guess it says in the trivia 2006 was like when he first had it in development. I don't know what you'd heard about this one.
Uh, Not too much, other than this was kind of his latest, not only starring vehicle but directorial vehicle. Yeah, that's really all I knew about it when you had mentioned checking it out. And yeah, and other than checking the IMDb and seeing that he really did have an ankle injury, that I guess they just wrote it into the script there. Like that was probably the most fascinating bit of trivia that I found.
Yes, yeah, and you do. One thing I did notice about this is he's not moving quite as crisply as he used to in terms of the martial arts stuff, but he can still hold a shotgun like anybody can.
Yeah, I mean, it almost reminded me of a Seagal movie, and I don't mean as a negative, but just like with that knowledge in my mind that he did have an injury, how many scenes feature him either sitting, laying down, or shooting somebody while sitting and or laying down?
Right, exactly. Which when we get into the story here, that it actually kind of explains some of the story a little bit. That might why it may have worked the way it did. I mean, I think of another movie like Acceleration, where he kind of spends a whole chunk of the movie just sort of sitting in front of some TVs watching Natalie Burn do stuff. And so this one, fortunately, was a movie that didn't allow for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I like you said when I guess was developing it in 2006. If 2006 Dolph had made it, and it was released then, I think it would have fared better. I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad by any means, but it would, like, a little bit more livelier action scenes definitely wouldn't have hurt.
Well, and the other thing too, right, is 2006 was a completely different world, not just for Dolph, right? So obviously, yes, Dolph was 18 years younger then, which so that would have definitely helped in terms of him, doing. He probably would have recovered from a sprained ankle much quicker, with him, kind of the athlete that he was. But like at that time, the market had more budget in them, and so you could do bigger things back then. I think we kind of the end of that is almost like in getting into the 2010s when I think maybe when Randall Emmett takes over, that's when it stops, the budget stopped getting to be so big. But, at that time, you think of like a Command Performance or something like that, this would have kind of slotted in with those kinds of movies.
Yeah, and one of the good things about Wanted Man, too, that I can say as a positive was we actually get to see Dolph playing his age.
Yes.
He's a little slower, uh, little surlier, little you know, worse for wear. But that kind of you know, you appreciate that where, you know, maybe somebody like a Sly or Arnold, they might kind of gloss over a little of their imperfections, you know, while they're aging. Where Dolph, there it was, you know, very many scenes in this film. It looks like he's in physical pain just trying to walk, and that worked for his character.
Yeah, because you juxtapose that with a movie like Kindergarten Cop 2, right, where he's playing somebody younger, and his character is essentially, I mean, he's dating a young woman who I want to say is like 30 years younger than him, something like that. But they're playing it up like no, they're almost the same age. Like that, or that they're maybe only like maybe like 10 or 15 years apart. And I do think I agree with you that as a look in a movie, it's definitely better when he kind of leans into that to being the ages. I mean, you think of someone like a Mark Dacascos who like in One Night in Bangkok is playing somebody 10 years older than he actually is. You probably would never see any of these guys doing that. Going that far. But I agree. It was kind of refreshing to see that here.
And I think it stopped short of being kind of like a Gran Torino, kind of like one last kind of you, you know rallying cry, because it he has a character arc in the film. And in well, did you want to
Yeah,
tell everyone that the story of it before we start kind of dissecting it a little bit?
Yeah, I'll do a quick synopsis. One thing I should point out too is that I'm not going to include the spoilers in the synopsis, but just know that there are going to be spoilers that we have to talk about when we get into this, because there are stuff to be honest, I don't know how big of a spoiler it is. I think you can kind of see it coming when the movie starts, so you know where this is going. But yeah, I'll do a quick synopsis here. So the idea is that there's some cops that try to they try to steal from some cartel guys, not knowing that there are undercover DEA agents as part of the buy. So when they go into the buy and they go to like steal the money, one of the DEA agents recognizes one of the guys and they have to kill everybody. So there's a big massacre. And these two young ladies of the night just happen to be there at this thing, and so they're witnesses to what happened. In the meantime, Dolph, back in Southern California, he's pulled over a man who I don't know if he's an illegal immigrant or if he's just of Mexican descent, and Dolph's character is not a fan of him because his character is racist. Just straight up in the movie, he becomes better as the movie goes on, but he's not a big fan of illegal immigrants or people from Mexico, and he's like not just like it's not like just police brutality. I mean, he's like slamming the guy's head in the car door, and of course, this is all caught on footage of like the body cam and all that stuff, and so he's going to be suspended, but then these girls turn up and he's going to give him like this one job to just go and pick up these girls and bring them from Mexico back to America so they can testify about who killed these DEA agents. So he goes, and of course nothing ever goes as well as they expect it to. So he's in the car when they're taking the girls. They get shot up. He survives with one of the girls. One of the girls dies, but the other girl who survives, she takes him back to her house, nurses him to health with the help of her family, and they make one last ditch attempt to go across the border. And that's when Kelsey Grammer, who plays one of his buddies, Michael Pare plays another one of his police buddies, and a couple other guys, they show up to help them get through the across the border. But the question is, are these guys there to help, or are they there to hurt, I guess is what. And so will Dolph figure out what's going on in time and get this young lady across the border and save the day? So yeah, Mitch, what did you think of this movie?
So I appreciated it more than I liked it. I liked, well, again, that Dolph was playing his age, playing somebody that had been kind of beat up a little bit. And like I was saying before, it doesn't go full on Gran Torino where kind of the bitter racist sees the error of his ways and stuff. And it had to be fair. I mean, he's more of a drunk uncle
Yes,
racist
right.
than a card carrying KKK racist. One of it's not. He puts his foot in his mouth several times, and the way he handles situations isn't best. But he learns through and uh, and I thought that was an interesting kind of backstory, kind of arc, other than like, oh, dead wife and kid. You know what I mean? Or like recovering alcoholic or something. It seemed, and it fit into kind of what's going on in today's society a little bit, without being preachy, without being kind of maudlin. Uh, so I like that about it, and like I said, Dolph has a visible ankle injury, and they make kind of several lines of dialogue about it because it's very obvious that he's limping, and at that point, when the movie really stops firing on any of its cylinders, it becomes more of a fun to watch just to see how long they keep him off his feet. As in, like, the second act of the movie, he's in bed, almost entirely in bed. There's a whole action sequence with him just like kind of laying on the duvet, and like it's so it's entertaining for sometimes the wrong reasons, but it's still mildly entertaining.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think you make a great point. Like his character, the best way I could term his character was like Jack Scalia in T-Force, where only instead of it being, and I think the androids in T-Force were almost like a metaphor for, either illegal immigrants or people of color. So kind of a similar vein there with Jack Scalia character, where then he's teamed up with one of the androids to fight, Evan Laurie in Malibu, and he suddenly changes his tune on all of that. And it's kind of a similar vibe here, where he's thinking like, oh, these people are just coming. It's interesting too, because I think he co-wrote this, and I think he pulls some like kind of the tropes of that, like you said, your old man uncle would use, like, oh, my parents came here from another, and they worked, and it's like, well, what do you think people are doing from Mexico? Like, it's not work when you're in a meat packing place and you're like having to work like 50-hour weeks. That's still work. That's not fun work either. So it's definitely like, then he kind of, like you say, like he kind of turns around there. Like to your point about him not wearing, him not walking enough, right? Or him, having, how much time he's either sitting or lying in bed. When the car gets shot up, and then the young woman takes him back to her place to nurse him back to health, they institute this whole him being handcuffed to a bedpost kind of thing, so he can't just go, because I guess like his character would have just gotten up and left. And one of the problems, of course, with that is it happens in the middle of the film, and it kind of grinds the film to a halt. It's like every minute spent in that circumstance is almost like 5 or 10 minutes of film, it feels like. And but to your point, like when you find out that it is kind of, you can kind of mitigate it a bit by joking around about the fact that, like, oh yeah, another scene where he's handcuffed to a bed watching a telenovela with the woman's mother, because he can't walk, he's got to let the swelling go down on that ankle.
Which and it also the watching telenovelas with the abuela, that in itself acts as character development too. So it's like, it's like a one-stop shop.
Right, exactly. And it's like, there's the martial arts stuff, I think, doesn't come off as well. But like I was saying, like when you see Dolph with a shotgun, when like they raid the house, the baddies raid the house, and he's like kind of handcuffed to the bed, and he's like, he needs to kind of get out of it. And like you said, he's like taking a shotgun from somebody else while he's still handcuffed to the bed, so he can't get out of the bed, and he's just like using it to like shoot guys through the window. It's the kind of Dolph that you didn't know you were going to see. It's not Dolph that I ever knew I needed, but it worked.
Right. What, and they do, make it kind of cool, like when he kind of just the nonchalant way he kind of racks the shotgun while being covered in blood, and there's a dead guy on top of him too. That's how he gets the shotgun. So I mean, and he kind of makes it look as cool as that could possibly look. And had we not really been kind of hit over the head with the idea that his he needed ankle surgery. That could have been a really cool, self-contained, almost kind of John Woo type action scene.
Yeah.
Like like a very claustrophobic kind of way to do your average kind of shotgun gun battle, but knowing what we knew about the ankle and everything, it's just kind of like, oh really, you couldn't have just gotten up.
Right, exactly. And like you said, so then I think we get these sort of like these sort of pitched shootouts. So like the opening sequence isn't really so much of a shootout, right? It's kind of more just like these guys just go in and they massacre some people. Though it's funny because PM had a way of making those massacre scenes even come off fantastic, right? Like I think of like Recoil when the mob guys go into the police station and just start shooting everybody in there, and how fun that was compared to what we get here when the DA agents go there. So, but I do think with the action sequences we get, so like we get the raid of the house, we get the initial shootout at the car, the raid of the house, and then we get some stuff later on as the plot sort of sort of resolving itself there. They were at least like decent action sequences. Like they were using more practical effects. The blood was real, and I definitely appreciated.
Yeah, and like I said, I it was moderately entertaining, and I think if had the script landed on uh, or Dolph had been able to perform the script in 2006 like he wanted, I think there would have been a lot more opportunities to make these action sequences bigger and better. Uh, and to his credit too, I mean he does a very fine job directing the film. It's competently put together. It's paced rather well. It's kind of it's very doesn't really call its attention to itself, but it doesn't really drag terribly except in that middle section maybe. But like um and just knowing what you know about Dolph, like if he had to go behind the camera, come out in front of the camera, yell action, so it's like you start thinking about that, you're like, well, like if I directed a movie with 1 foot basically in a ankle brace, I probably couldn't have done a good of a job.
No, that's a great point. That's one thing I think about this movie that does set it apart a little bit from some of the other. I mean, other than Castle Falls, right, which he directed as well. It does kind of feel, and I don't know how you feel about this, but it does kind of feel like when Dolph directs the movie, it has a little bit more of an attention to detail and a little bit higher quality than just his normal, like I'm just just here for however many pages of script or something.
Yeah, I'm not going to go on a limb and say he's like a underrated auteur or anything, but he does bring something to the table. um and I think there's whether it was the racism angle or the immigration angle, I think there was care, because he co-wrote it too, if I'm not
He
mistaken.
did, yeah, with Michael
Yeah,
Worth. Yeah.
yeah. And so I think when you have a project that you're shepherding from the script stage to the directing stage, you're not even going to let like an ankle injury kind of like slow you down. You want to get your film made and out, even if you're kind of hampered by your own physical limitations. So I like you said I think in quite honestly, Dolph, uh, of all the action stars of the era, with maybe the exception of Seagal, like the video vacuum's motto is always quantity over quality.
Right.
And the fact that he's able to be as prolific as he is while still kind of putting a little stamp or signature on each one to at least make them kind of feel not so samey. Like maybe 5 years from now, when we're trying to think about, oh, what was the last few Dolph movies, you're going to be thinking of, oh, this is the one where he was the reformed racist at the border. You're like, oh, because that it's not just like when you think of Seagal movies, right? All right, they all have 3 titles. Like other than I think it was Perfect Weapon where he played him, he fought himself. Like that's the only one I can really kind of really like think about like I can't remember the plot of the last 10 Seagal movies. So there's at least something there to hang your hat on. Be like, okay, like Castle Falls. Okay, that was the one with Scott Adkins. Yeah, and Altitude. That was one on the plane with Denise Richards. So he's able to put something on there to make them not so generic.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic point because I mean the movies themselves, right? Especially when you get into that 2010s period, you get some real interesting ones, right? That he does. But one of the ones that I think of in that window is oh, I can't find it now. It was the one that he did. I can't think. It had Greg Evigan's daughter, and the cops are coming after me because I'm forgetting this Dolph movie that I'm getting. Stash House. Stash House is what it was.
Right.
You know, the Stash House, like the reason why Stash House didn't work for me was it didn't have enough Dolph because Dolph was like the only compelling figure in that movie, but he was like so fantastic. But it's like the rest of the movie, I was like, do I care what's going on with these two kids? Not so much, but I want to see Dolph in there kind of chewing scenery.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely films where he probably has a limited, like a limited screen time or shooting schedule, like something like Blackwater.
Oh yes, yeah.
Where it's almost like a glorified cameo, or he just is maybe doing it as a favor to somebody. Whereas this was definitely, I don't know if I would say passion project, but he actually showed up and and really put. I think there's more care and thought into the whole film, and I can't say that it's not a middle of the road Dolph film. I would put it slightly further up the road from middle of the road, but nobody's going to mistake it for Showdown in Little Tokyo or anything.
Right.
But it's one of it kind of checks the boxes, and it kind of it satisfies your craving for another Dolph actioner until the next one.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best bet because I think this, like you said, like had this come out in 2006, right? You when you look at 2000 and that period for him, I mean, you see like some of the movies that are coming out at that time. I mean, yes, there's some like Retrograde or maybe didn't do so well or Diamond Dogs, which he also directed. But you're also getting like the Russian Specialist, Missionary Man, Command for Performance, and this would have probably slotted in perfectly with one of those at that time. But we're getting it now. We're getting it here in 2024, and I think in that sense, right, it's almost like it's a different Dolph that we're getting in 2024. But like you said, if we're going to keep getting Dolph in 2024, this is the Dolph that I want. I want something that, like you said, it kind of it satiates my desire for more Dolph action films.
Right, and then it acknowledges that he's not getting any younger, and he's I think it was whether he's going to play more of these types of beat up world weary characters moving forward. It's a good kind of like, I don't know if passing the baton is a good metaphor, but it's certainly like a good transition film to say, okay, well, maybe I'm able to play maybe these kind of verge of retirement characters, or if he's going to do like a war movie, he can be like the grizzled sergeant who barks the orders in the beginning of the movie, and the young guys do all the legwork or something. I would definitely be down for that. And it was cool too seeing Kelsey Grammer and Michael Pare kind of whether they resonated with the themes of the movie or they were just collecting a paycheck. They actually seemed involved and invested. It's funny because you don't really think of Kelsey Grammer as an action star, but after the Expendables 3, I mean, he is. I mean, you can't take that away from him. So it was nice to see another Expendable in the movie, even though it was maybe the most unlikely. Well, Megan Fox maybe, but the most unlikely Expendable of them all is in there too. So
Yeah, right. And I mean, and of course, Kelsey Grammer is having an interesting time, right? Because he's his Frasier's out again, right? They're making a new Frasier, or they've made a new Frasier. I guess I don't know if they're going to do another season of it, beyond the one that he just did. And then like he gets this kind of this cameo, Butner, at the end of the Marvels, which was kind of one of the more talked about things. Which I almost feel like they're probably not going to even go in that direction now with how poorly the Marvels did. I think they're just going to use this Deadpool and Wolverine movie to reset the whole thing and put all the mutant characters into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But it was kind of fun to think, fun to see his character from X-Men Last Stand, kind of just like, oh, there's Beast, there's Kelsey Grammer there. And then like you said, I mean, he's essentially getting reunited with Dolph here, right? They both were in Expendables 3, and now he's here in this. Like we didn't get as much of him. It would have been fun to get more of him, but I don't mind Kelsey Grammer with a Hawaiian shirt, and a gun, just like kind of spouting off whatever stuff he was spouting off. It was kind of a fun Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah, it was almost like something you would see like maybe uh M. Emmett Walsh type slash Lance Henriksen kind of grizzled, crotchety older kind of past his prime kind of drinking buddy guy.
I feel like Kelsey Grammer would not want this, but I think I would kind of be interested to see, now that we've lost M. Emmett Walsh, to have Kelsey Grammer fill that niche and do the M. Emmett Walshian roles that we need.
Yeah, I mean, I think what makes his appearance in the movie kind of fun is like we all have this kind of, at least I do, when you hear Kelsey Grammer you think Frasier,
Right.
and he's definitely not Frasier in this. He is, kind of just like, this squirrely kind of cantankerous old guy that, I think when we first see him he's like getting a lap dance from a stripper, so it's like it's very, and he just owns it. He's and him and Michael Pare make a good little duo there. Even though, like you said, they're not given much to do, but they're given enough to do that it kind of matters. Kind of like once they show up again in the third act.
Right, because yeah, I mean, Pare gets even worse, right? I mean, I feel like Pare is one of those up and comer guys, or not up and comers, but one of those guys that's like trying to be the next Eric Roberts, right? Where he's just like, just give me the script, give me like, give me a half a day and a paycheck, and I'll do the role. There's a few names. Dermot Mulroney's getting into that category, that space. So it seems like Eric Roberts just created this whole like world of people that just want to be Eric Roberts types. And I mean, that's exactly what Pare is here. He's doing an Eric Roberts style role where Kelsey Grammer gets a little bit more to do there. But it Pare, when he does those small parts, he's at least getting a better sense of how to do them the way Eric Roberts would do them, where it's like you're only on the screen for a scene or two. Like, can you make the most of it?
Yeah, and I think was it Direct Action or Direct Contact? He was in, but he was with Dolphin. I can't remember. He's
I
been
think
in
it
a couple Dolph movies together.
Yeah, I
They've been
think
in.
it was direct act. I think it was direct contact. 'Cause direct action, I think, is the one that was directed by um, uh, Sidney Fury. So,
Okay.
oh wait, direct action is the Sidney Fury one. Direct contact is the Michael Pare one. So yeah, it's Sidney Fury who also did Superman 4 and Detention, another Dolph.
It all comes back to Superman 4.
Exactly. Yes.
um, but yeah, like, yeah, that's a good comparison because he is. I can't really say the poor man's Eric Roberts because Eric Roberts is the poor man's Eric Roberts. So I guess he's the middle income man's
Right.
Eric Roberts. But yeah, he is like he is present in all of the scenes. I mean, he still kind of has the same kind of like, deadpan delivery, but I mean, he nothing's really changed about Michael Pare since like his days on uh Greatest American Hero. and like Eddie and the Cruisers. I mean, he's still like, you know, if you blindfold me and he talks now, I mean, it's like, oh, that's Michael Paré's voice. I mean, he looks almost the same. He's been really well preserved, and that's shocking for somebody who's been in so many Uwe Boll movies. So it's you know, he's one of those, I guess, kind of survivors. He's been in the business for over 40 years and still acting there, you know, so it's just, you know, I think he was one of those guys. He was always like one movie away from kind of being kind of like a big name, but he just never got there. But, you know, I'm glad he showed up in this.
Yeah, because like you said, like his big ones, right? Like Eddie and the Cruisers was you know it's one that we think of, right, you know, growing up in the 80s, right? Everybody, you know, I remember my friends and I, when we used to cause trouble in high school, we would play the John Cafferty the Beaver Brown Band soundtrack from that one. So I remember like Dark Side and stuff like that. We'd play that stuff while we were you know, toilet papering people's house and stuff like that, whatever. That, you know, so of course, you know, remember that one. And then, you know, of course, Streets of Fire, you know, he was kind of known for this, but then it, like you say, it kind of fell off for a bit for him. And he's found this thing now with these direct to video movies where it's like, hey, you know, I'll just, you know, do as many of these as possible with as many pages. It's almost like he kind of sees how it's working instead of trying to be the star of movies and try to see how many movies, you know, because I think that was his thing. I remember there was a movie called Gargoyles he did in the I think it was like the late 90s, early 2000s, where he was the star. But he wasn't really getting those starring roles the way that I think he would have wanted to. And it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to keep doing Gargoyles? Was the movie? Actually, it came out in '04. It was actually more recent than I thought. But you know, he's playing like kind of the leads in those kinds of movies, and I think he saw it as like, well, why am I doing that? You know, like these movies don't do as well. What if I'm like a small supporting role, and I could do a ton of those and make more money that way? And yes, that's what we got here, which I think it's working. I mean, you know, we see him a lot now. You're always going to see some Michael Paré, but I kind of appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, why spend a month in Bulgaria making one movie when you can spend 1 month in Bulgaria making one movie a week, and you know, they only need you for 2 or 3 days. So there's nothing wrong with that business model.
No, no, and I mean, you know, I mean, it's definitely a living that any of us would like. You know, I would, you know, I mean, I imagine he's doing okay in the sense of like he's probably got a decent house. I mean, I remember Eric Roberts, they showed his house on because he was on a My Cat from Hell episode. So his wife gets him booked on everything, including My Cat from Hell. So he and his wife, because the wife was there for more of it, but they had a blind cat who I guess was having trouble with one of the other cats, and so they what they did is they put a bell on the other cat so that the blind cat would know you're coming. But yeah, so he was, you know, Jackson Galaxy is helping out, and then there's Eric Roberts, and it's like, yeah, you know, nice house in the L.A. area, you know, plenty of land for their cats to run around in and stuff like that, and it's like, you know, he's just going out on movies all the time and stuff like that, and I think, you know, Michael Paré is kind of a similar thing, like, hey, I've got enough of a name from these movies that I've done that like, you know, and I mean, to his credit, you know, Dolph was doing something similar for a period. You know, I think in the 2010s he was doing a lot of this kind of thing where it's like a, you know, short roles here or there. And now he's kind of getting back into more starring things, and then the short roles and the big budget things. So I think once the Expendables came and he got those big budget things, he kind of transitioned to doing more of that.
Yeah, and it's you know, and I'm sure, you know, some of the catering on Aquaman 2 probably the budget for that is probably the budget of Wanted Man. So it's kind of it's cool when you see guys like that. They have the best of both worlds. They're, you know, got small roles in huge movies and huge roles in small movies, and you know, they don't step too far out of their comfort zone. They still deliver kind of what their audience expects. And like I said, like Wanted Man, you know, 5 years from now, I'll be like, yeah, that's the one I did the podcast for, and he's, you know, a racist cop and learns not to be so damn racist all the time. And oh yeah, that was the one with Kelsey Grammer. Okay, like, you know, like I'm gonna walk away with something. It's not gonna be one of these movies where I like add it to my queue, and then when I go to watch it, I look at the IMDb reviews. I'm like, oh shit, I reviewed this 8 years ago. I don't even remember seeing this.
Right,
So
exactly.
I don't know if you're like that, but there's so many times I go to watch a movie and then I'm like, wait, I've seen this and I've reviewed it and I hated it. What?
Yes, yeah, that happens so much to me. Yeah, it's amazing how many like I'll have movies that I'll have like in my Tubi queue to for reviews, and then I'll realize like one of the recent ones was the Bad Pack. That sort of
Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, I got to watch the Bad Pack. How have I not seen the Bad Pack? It's got Roddy Piper, Robert Davi, and all these names, Brent
Yeah.
Huff. Yeah, and then I looked on IMDb and it was like, but you reviewed it, so you had that you didn't miss it. You'd seen it, and it was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I mean Seagal for sure. I think is the biggest one of that, right? Because Seagal is like you said, like there's a period of those Keone Waxman movies there where you're just like he didn't really have big stars in them with him. I mean, every once in a while, like Byron Mann would be in there and be like, okay, but which
Johnny
Byron?
Messner or somebody. Yeah.
Right, yeah, Mesner, Bren Foster, and you're just like, like in fact, it was like the most bonkers ones that I'd remember, like the one he did with Ving Rhames, where it was like Bren Foster's hands were all smashed up, and then like Danny Trejo's using like scorpions to like fix his hands, and it's like what is going on here? Like that's what we almost like remember that one more than like the five that he did in Bulgaria that Keone Waxman directed.
Right, and it's so funny. Like I know I'm getting older. I know maybe the old computer upstairs doesn't work as good anymore. But like I feel like I've forgotten more movies than I remember at this point, and most of them are like those, like you said, that they're and at least like I said, uh, uh, Lundgren makes movies where there's something you can hang your hat on.
Yeah.
Seagal is just like memory hole. Like right after 88 minutes, you've forgotten what you know, right? Is that a Widow's Peak one or is that a goatee one? Is he wearing the orange shades? Was it a kimono? Was it a leather jacket? Like,
Yes, right, and it's like the info dump, right? Like how many like it's like okay, so in this one he's a former CIA guy who was like the deal went bad. That's what okay. No, that he was a former CIA guy who just went under. He just went underground because he wanted to. Okay, he's a former CIA guy who plays music in Louis. It's whatever. It's like they're always a former CIA guy, and he's always the baddest motherfucker, whatever. That's there's always all that stuff. And yeah, it's funny how you can look at Dolph and you can go through his filmography, and it's like okay, so in the tracker, he was, I don't remember a lot about the movie, but I just remember him like, being cool, like drinking coffee with a pea coat on it in Italy, and like, okay, that was, and then like Hard Night Falls, like, oh, Natalie Byrne, right? Okay, that's right. Die Hard in a mansion, in like an old, like, European mansion. Like, you're right. Like, Dolph's ones have a little bit of uniqueness to them, I guess Van Damme's another one like that, right? That like there's those DTV ones, they don't all run together the way Seagal's do.
yeah, and and I think as Van Damme gets older, he's kind of found like a new leaf as a character actor. I mean, he's very like enemies closer, where he's almost like chewing the scenery, and he's got like this bright red hair, and it's like you're like, gosh, like he would have made a pretty good Joker. Like like he's just he's of all the DTV guys, I think he's the one that's kind of having the most fun at this late stage. I think he knows that maybe he can't be doing splits forever, so I think some of the directors might give him a little more leeway. And I think too, like it might be a response to some of the reviews when he was younger saying, oh, his accent this and wooden performance that, and now he's been in the business long enough where he's kind of getting an opportunity to kind of just embrace kind of his inner thespian.
Right, because right, we all saw him in JCVD, and we were like, "What is this?" Like, we didn't know he had this in him, and that was fantastic, right, in and of itself. And then, like you said, like you think of like um, what was it? The Enemies Closer. It's like, I mean, and of course the thing with Enemies Closer is like I'm like, what am I doing with, like, the guy from, I don't remember what show that guy was on that was like playing the hero. I'm supposed to like believe him as like some sort of special forces guy, and it's like, no, I'm rooting for Van Damme here. I want to see him win. I want to see him like beat everybody and be the king of all of this, and the same thing with Expendables 2, right? It's like, man, he's a really bad baddie in Expendables 2, but I actually want to see him beat Stallone, right? I want to see him win. I want to see him, go off into the sunset with Scott Adkins and do more bad stuff. And like, like that would have been a great, spin-off movie, right? Villain, an expendable story, right? Like that would be a great movie for us.
Well, we'll see my idea, and then nobody's ever taken me up on it, but I'll tell anybody who listens. He Van Damme should have been twins. There's Jean Villain, and then there would be um, Claude Hero, Heroux, and he's the good guy, and then we can do like double impact all over again because I mean he's only played twins like 7 times, and his career, he could do it with his eyes shut. So
That would be an amazing movie if like 'cause I don't know what's going on with the Expendables. I don't know if, like, because four did so poorly that I don't know if like Stallone's done with it. He's just putting it to bed, which is an interesting thing because he's created some of these iconic characters. Like, he's got, obviously Rocky, Rambo, and it's like, Barney, I think, was in that class, like below those ones, but in that class, like he'd created something there. And but yeah, Verlaine, I mean, bring him back as hero, right? And even like to your point, like, how in the second Expendables there was like kind of this free for all where it was like, oh, here's Chuck Norris and here's Schwarzenegger and here's Bruce Willis, and everybody's just hanging out at this airport blowing stuff up. Like, what would be great is if they did another thing like that, one of those movies where it's like, hey, who is this guy? Oh, that guy looks like Verlaine. No, no, I am his twin brother. I am Hero. And it's like, wait, and now then he could like join them and like have like a scene with them.
yeah, it would be amazing. I mean, the whole thing writes itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, from Dolph's standpoint, I mean, I think, the Expendables, in his, I think what's different between, Dolph and Van Damme, right, is that the Expendables are that first Expendables movie is what got Dolph back into the consciousness of the mainstream. And I think, like, to your point about the Dolph-a-sance, like, for us who had been enjoying him for so long, we were, it was exciting to see him on the big screen. I mean, it didn't work that way for, like, like say like Gary Daniels or Stone Cold Steve Austin, but for Dolph, it was like suddenly people wanted to see him again.
Yeah, I could be wrong about this, but I believe because he is like the turncoat character in the first one. I think he was actually supposed to die, but when the test audience were like, no, no, you got to bring him back. So at the end, he like comes back, and like it's just kind of a testament to the likability of Dolph. It's like, oh, that even when he sells out all of his best friends, they're still like, oh, we ain't mad at you. Come on, have a
Exactly.
beer.
Right, exactly. You almost killed us in this sequence here, with Barney driving his fancy truck and all that stuff. But now, you're good now. You're good. Come hang out at the bar with us while we throw darts and Jason Statham throws a knife and stuff like that.
And I enjoyed the fourth one. I mean, I think I think it's the weak link. But if any franchise had if a weak link like that one, I think all the franchises would be fine.
Yeah, I agree with you there because the issue that I had with the fourth one was, one, I don't know that it necessarily needed to be in the theater. I enjoyed seeing it in the theater, but I don't know that it needed to be. But I think the other thing is that there's too much kind of like kiddie humor of like, oh, Randy Couture's peeing on something, or that kind of stuff. Like, look at the size of his cock or whatever, whatever it was that they were doing there. And it felt like the other movies didn't have that kind of thing as much. Like, there weren't so many of those like off, like odd, like, tonal moments there, but the action itself was solid. Like, it was good action.
Yeah, and I think too, like I think where it suffered was just kind of conceptually. I know at various times they were going to do an Expendables movie. It was going to be the all-female Expendables, and at one point they were going to do a Christmas story, give Jason Statham his own film, and I think they used elements of both,
Hmm.
because at times, Barney is, absent in the film for a large amount of time. So I think that was part of, might have been part of the original script for the Christmas Story, and then I think Megan Fox bringing her into it might have been like some leftover from the Expendables script. So it kind of felt like a hodgepodge of ideas, whereas the other ones were just like tough men on a mission movies kind of deals. Uh, but because actually, I think I heard that they actually did reshoots to put another Stallone scene in there because people were complaining that he wasn't in it enough. But
Right.
yeah, so but and that the lack of Stallone is resolved in a fun way, and it's like well, it doesn't really make up for the lack of Stallone, but it was a fun, like, you're like, okay, like, and it kind of is almost like a running joke of, will he kill off Rambo? Will he kill off Rocky? What? And he just, it's so funny. He just can't seem to, like, turn the page on any of these characters. He wants to hold on because there might be one more sequel down the line that, we could get some more blood from that stone at some point.
And to be fair, I mean, I think there's still a lot of stuff that could be done. I think with the Expendables. I think I think one of the things that feels like he's kind of caught up with trying to get Rocky back because he's I guess lost the rights to that, and which is interesting too because that interplay with Dolph because they keep talking about the Ivan Drago movie that is rumored, and so it's almost like Dolph was like, okay, well, I'm gonna maybe throw my lot here with Michael B. Jordan, who's doing all of the who's doing all of that the Creed stuff. But he's trying to get that character back. I don't feel like anybody wants to take uh the Expendables from him, right? Like the Expendables is his. I think he can do what he wants with it. And so but I wonder like what if it's a matter of like getting it bankrolled the way it was, the way he wants it. I mean, one of the things with the first two, right, is that Spiro Rosato's action directed them, and I think that was a huge plus for them that he needed, that he didn't get from 3 and 4. It definitely those movies, like you said, they're good, but one and two with Spiro Rosato's at the helm, it was like kind of next level stuff.
Yeah, and it didn't help too that four is essentially like a remake of three, like getting all brand new Expendables for the point of getting all brand new Expendables.
Right.
Uh, it's like you don't like we know, okay, you're not getting Bruce and you're not getting Arnold, but you don't really have to call attention to it. Just bring in 50 Cent, say, oh, he's the new guy. You just you don't have to kind of like draw water from that well again. And I liked Andy Garcia as the villain. I don't think he was up to par. Yeah, it's hard, when your series villains go from Eric Roberts to John Claude Van Damme to Mel Gibson. I mean, I like Andy Garcia, but he's just kind of falls short of that category. But I thought they gave him a lot of kind of fun stuff to do, and it wasn't just kind of a generic villain kind of character.
Right, yeah, because Stallone took advantage of that with Mel Gibson, where it's one of those things when you see a Mel Gibson direct to video movie, you realize how good he is. Like it's almost like a reminder of like because like compared to everybody else, it's like, oh wow, this guy, if it wasn't for all the stuff that he was saying and all that stuff, and there was that period in that kind of that mid 2010s area where he was trying to make a comeback by being baddies, right? Because he was in that one, he was in the second Machete film, and then it was like, oh no, more stuff came out about stuff that he said. It was just like he was just too toxic, and it was like direct to video is like kind of the best bet for him. But Stallone took great advantage of it in that window where we were kind of like, yeah, you know what? Maybe we could give Mel Gibson a second chance. And he hits it out of the park as this really fantastic baddie. And you're right, Andy Garcia is much more understated. He can play a great baddie, but not the kind of baddie that would be following, like you said, scenery chewing Eric Roberts, who's just absolutely killing it. And then, Van Damme, who's just like wants to steal the movie from Stallone and wants to just win it over, and then Mel Gibson, who wants his comeback, right? Who's like trying to like show everybody how great he is again. Andy Garcia's understated, bad guy was definitely like you said, it was a completely, especially 10 years later, it was a different thing.
And I think honestly, it was a good from a script standpoint, it was an interesting thing. It was basically he was like the trench stand-in, like
Yeah,
for or no, not Church. I'm sorry, he was the
yeah,
Church stand-in for Bruce Willis. He was, and to be have the handler be the villain was interesting, but in a movie that already has a big third act twist, I don't really think it really needed another twist because expendable movies don't really live and die by plot twists.
right.
But it was serviceable, and it was like, okay, it's slightly different than what we've seen before. By the time you get to part four, you do have to start tweaking things a little bit.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, and I feel like there could be something there. I feel like, we could have something, in this. I didn't realize that part four actually had, I don't know how to say his name, Brian Smurs, SMRZ, who he's done some other big ones. Like he did Shazam, Fury of the Gods, Ghostbusters Afterlife, X-Men Dark Phoenix. So he was the Predator. That's how I recognize his name. He was the for the Predator, the Shane Black one. He played is that the one? The Predator? No, or is yeah, yeah, because Predators is the Robert Rodriguez one. That's right. Okay.
Right.
So no, so he had some, he had a name there, and I mean the action in that sense, the action was great though too. And so if you feel like if you just get the names right, and you get a guy like this, like Brian Smurs, or if it's not Chad Stahelski, maybe Darren Prescott, who worked under Stahelski and Spiro Rosatos, like somebody like that who's good at this, and maybe just shrink it down to an hour and a half, just get like the core names that we want in it, and just let them have it. I mean, like, what does Dolph have to do beyond just like funny one-liners and shooting big guns, right? Like that's plenty for us. That would get us to the church on time.
Yeah, and I think too I mean there is kind of like that hilarious continuity error in the beginning where the bad guy comes in and raids
Oh,
uh
right.
the fortress or whatever, and then Andy Garcia brings everybody in, gives them the briefing. They all get in the plane and they fly all the way to the Middle East, which had to take at least a day.
Right.
But when they get there, he like just coming out of the warehouse. I'm like, wait, how long was he in that warehouse? It was just
Yeah.
it's one of those things like that you're like, okay, why am I asking questions in this pivotal
Exactly.
movie?
Right.
But
Right. Well, because that's the thing, right? Is that you get like stuff like that, like the whole thing with Mike Muller's character, where Stallone ends up like swapping him out in the plane and just essentially just cold-blooded murdering him. It's like some of that stuff is just like tonally off. But then on the other hand, you've got Jason Statham riding around a dirt bike on a boat, blowing things up, and it's like, okay, that works. Like, just give me more of that, and I'll be fine. Or him and Tony Jaa, beating up a bunch of people. Just give me enough of that, and I'll be fine with it.
right, and I think like after that sequence or whatever, they did a good job of actually containing the action to that boat. And like so you have like the prison deck below where they have to make their escape and they can do hand to hand stuff. And then top side he can be riding the dirt bike around, and then in the captain's quarters they can do like the big fight with Iko Uwais. And like so it was like just it strictly from budget wise, you can make a lot of use out of that one location. So I think even if they were to do kind of like a Die Hard riff, or where they were in like a mansion or some, I think there's a way that they could do it on a smaller scale and still get some pretty good results from it.
Yeah, I think you're. I mean, you have to feel like. I mean, I don't know, and I don't know, like, because I don't know if there were some issues. Because I know this movie. I think this movie was shelved for a period, so I don't know too if there were like there were issues with this movie, and that would make Stallone maybe say I don't want to do this anymore or whatever. But man, I kind of feel like it would be nice if he just kind of, you know, yeah, just gave us it went back to one and two, but again, with like an action director like he had here in part four, and just it kept the story nice and streamlined and nice and action wise. I think it would work. I think we could do something there.
And honestly, I'm not saying that they have to phone it in, but really, like I said, you can have Stallone to kind of send them on their mission, come in to like save the day, similar to what he does here. If he wanted to limit his screen time and let Statham or somebody new kind of do the heavy lifting, it would be nice to have Arnold back, and even some of the newer guys, like or just not necessarily new, just new to the franchise, like somebody like a Donnie Yen
Oh
or
yeah.
um, somebody of that caliber. And and I think like I said, I think they can still get some more blood from the stone, but whether they're willing to, since the box office receipts were kind of dwindling after this one, I don't know.
Yeah. No, because I mean, this movie had $100 million budget, and I mean, I don't know. I think only one of the John Wicks were that high. So $100 million budget and only made 37 million in the theater, unfortunately. So it's like, but it's like, do you need to get that high? Like you said, like you could probably do, if you could do one for 40 million. I mean, and I think if they do one for 40 million and had it streamlined like that and got it in like some theaters, but had like a nice word of mouth amongst our kind of fandom and stuff like that. I think you could get something that you spend 40 million on and you make 160 million. And maybe that's where the series needs to sit, but that's not bad. That's not a bad return on investment there.
Yeah, and the market is kind of changing for I think just action in general, and I think when you look at something like John Wick, I think there people are not only responding to Keanu Reeves as John Wick. I think they like that world. I think they like to see the unique villains and kind of how everything kind of expands from sequel to sequel, and just the world kind of gets bigger. And I don't think you can do that with the Expendables so much. I think it's just I think it can be done, but it's almost like apples and oranges, because there's a very old school aesthetic to the Expendables, and I don't know if it can continue past just kind of like nostalgia. I think they would have to do something like to really move the franchise forward if they wanted something like that. But I don't know if we want some necessarily want something new from the Expendables movie. So it's like a catch-22.
No, you make a great point because yeah, I'm seeing like even the first one had a budget of 80 million. And so and it's like you said, like these movies, like the John Wick movies, sort of like you said, they like each one kind of built on the previous one, like slightly bigger. And I mean and they scaled, like you said, they scaled really well in the sense that like every film made about four times the budget of the made about four times its budget. So every time they increased the budget, they were getting the return back. Whereas, like you said, with these movies, they're just coming out of the gate with huge budgets, and so yeah, Stallone would have to get a green light for $100 million to make another Expendable the way we want to see it made, maybe unless they do like some kind of smaller scale kind of thing.
Or I mean, another option would be a series. I mean, he's kind of getting a lot of traction from Tulsa King, and I think maybe with his connections there, if they wanted to, I mean, they could probably just do like a limited series. But at the same time, like, do you really want a limited Expendable series, or would you just rather, instead of an 8 hour kind of half-assed, two episodes are really good, the rest are middling kind of thing, or would you just rather want a 90-minute kick-ass movie? So
Right, exactly. Right, probably that second one there. So yeah, so
yeah.
we'll see. And I guess kind of as we're kind of bringing it back here to Wanted Man as we're kind of wrapping up here. I mean, I think the one thing that Wanted Man I think does, and I think to your point, I mean, obviously it's not any kind of Expendables kind of movie, but between the fun cast and the fact that we do get some like real practical solid action, and I think Dolph's direction is pretty good here. It's I don't want to say elevated. Everybody uses the term elevated. I don't know if it's an elevated, 2020's direct-to-video movie. But I think it is the kind of thing that if you see it on the free streamers, you're not going to want a temporal refund. Maybe that's the best way to think of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it was a nice try. They tried. The results may have been a little mixed at best, but there was some thought and care put into it. And guys like you and me, we appreciate that. Average Joe viewer, they might not be able to differentiate this between that, but for the the ones that love Dolph and that keep going back for more, we'll be able to, like I said, it's not middle of the road. It's a little further up the road from middle of the road, and that's guys like you and me. We don't need a GPS to find that. We just go right to it, and we're like, okay, we know that's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, and I think also being on Hulu, I think that helps with this one because it's interesting. Like, there's a ton of Dolph on Tubi. I mean, a lot of it is really good ones, and so it's like if you've got to rent a Dolph when there's so much that's good that's on Tubi, or like you said, like we both have a good amount of Dolph in our DVD collections as well. That like Hulu is a good place for something like this, and you kind of like, okay, it's a new one from Dolph. It's something I haven't seen before. I can add it to my list of Dolph movies that I've seen. And again, the novelty of Kelsey Grammer that doesn't hurt either.
Yeah, like I said, like Hulu is an ideal streamer for something like this, or because it's kind of mature, a little bit more mature than uh, his usual fare, and it's kind of skews to more of an older crowd. And I think and the best thing that can happen is people will see this, and then at the end they'll pop up. So you may also like a bunch of other Dolph movies, and then they click on that, and they just have themselves like a Dolph marathon. So
Yeah, which is the perfect thing, I think, for everybody listening out there. If you haven't, my friends and I, we call them Dolph Fest. We would actually like plan weekends around them. Like we would, all kind of hang out at somebody's house for a weekend, and we would like do like 5 movies over the course of a weekend. So it's been a long time since I've had a Dolph Fest, probably like maybe like 25 years or something like that, or 18 years. 18 years. It was the mid 2000s. So, but that's what we would do. We would line up, and this would have been something that would have probably been showcased at a Dolph Fest as the newer Dolph movie that would have probably been maybe on a Saturday night there or something like that, and everybody would have gotten it out of the way, and then like the classics would have been kind of buttressed around it.
oh yeah. I mean, it's one of those where like I watched it, kind of like fully expecting to kind of have to turn it off and do laundry or something. I was like, okay, I'm like, and it held my attention all the way through, and and it was it's solid, it's solid, it's like I said, it checks the boxes, and which is when you and I watch these things a lot of time, and like I said, it goes in one ear and out the other, and it's nice. It's something that I watched, I think maybe 5 or 6 days ago, and I'm still, I didn't have to refer to my notes once because I was like, oh yeah, and, there's sometimes I'm like, okay, what the hell did I just watch? Oh yeah, let me.
Right.
It's so funny. Like I said, whether it's my age or my brain is going, but like yeah, this one kind of rattled around in there a little bit longer than usual. So if that's damning it with faint praise, I don't know if that's but it's there's something there for somebody that's looking for something more, and if you're not, well, you'll be entertained too.
Oh, yeah, I think in these days with the massive amount of content that we've got available, even though we spent like the first half of the podcast complaining about the stuff that we can't get with all the content available, but with all the content that is available, to have something be memorable, I think that is actually a good compliment for it. I think it's a good praise. I think it's a good way to sum this one up for sure. So yeah, I mean, Mitch, as we're wrapping up, anything you'd like to plug?
Well, I have my latest book is still available on Amazon, The Kung Fu Companion, the Chopsaki Movie Guide. It's just 200 plus pages of oddball kung fu movie reviews, everything from Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal, to Godfrey Ho, to just very you know cheesy ninja movies to big budget action. it's all there. And if you want to check out my website, it's the video vacuum dot blogspot.com. And I'm on Twitter, video vacuum at Twitter, and follow me. And right now, I've been uh, trying to watch and review a movie on physical media. It's called Let's Get Physical. Do a movie a day. Haven't been able to review very much because I've been out of town, but uh, I'm still watching at a regular pace, and hopefully about at the end of the summer I'll get all caught up. Currently going through a box set of Roger Corman public domain movies, so that's always fun watching the old Corman stuff. And I wanted to do a tribute to him when he passed away, so this is probably as close as I'll get to that. But yeah, it's always fun to go through all the old Corman stuff.
Yeah, he's always got some interesting stuff for sure. I mean, and I always I like same thing. I'm always amazed like when I'm watching stuff. I'm like, oh, that's right, that was Corman. Like a Jerry Trimble movie or Tom the Dragon Wilson. Yeah, he was someone we knew. I mean, he was older, so we knew it was probably only a matter of time before he would pass. But it's like, man, yeah, when you think of like how much stuff he's contributed, it definitely it was a sad one when he did pass.
Yeah, and so many people he opened the door for Coppola, Nicholson, Scorsese. I mean, like everybody talks about, the kind of like the just the classic films of the 70s, and you wouldn't have any of them hadn't Corman not given those guys jobs in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is amazing because it's like, we think of like how the movie industry changed, right? Whereas in like in the 50s and 60s, you had sort of like these epics that were being made. And then these guys are coming and making movies with Corman. And then the 70s, right, when Robert Evans is taking over Paramount. And now like suddenly now these auteurs are making these movies like The Godfather and Taxi Driver and all of that stuff that like, yeah, how much Corman had to do with that, like making we think of the 70s like kind of like the 90s or the 30s as like one of the best decades for movies. And yeah, I never really thought of it, but I always thought about Corman giving them his shot, giving them their shot. But you're right that like I think he played a lot in like us having them be the kind of directors they were.
And I remember I saw an interview with him once. He said, he's like, I'll give you a job, whether it's directing or acting or whatever. He goes, and if you do a good job, you'll only have to work for me once.
Right. It's a great line for sure. Yeah, he was always fantastic. I remember seeing him on Real Wild Cinema. Do you remember that show was on USA with Sandra Bernhard?
Oh yeah,
Sunday nights. Yeah, and I remember him being on there and her interviewing him, and yeah, some of the great nuggets that he had about like yeah working with some of those names or yeah just the ideas that he had for making movies and stuff like that.
yeah, and it's just one of those things that we always I think took for granted because he was always there, and
Yeah.
whether it's the sci-fi movies of the 2000s or the drive-in movies of the 70s, you always kind of knew a Corman movie just by kind of looking at it, or at least like at least he had some of his proteges like Jim Wynorski or Fred Olen Ray or somebody like yeah, there's definitely the Corman aesthetic at work here.
Yeah, which is always fantastic. So yeah, definitely check out those reviews. Now, for people listening, the link to your site and to your the page on Amazon for your newest book, those will be in the podcast description, so people can just go. If you're listening, I think I know for me, I've done it where I'm on iTunes and I just look at the podcast description and I just click right on the link and it takes me where I need to go. So yes, everybody will be able to find those links there.
Awesome, that's fantastic.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, Mitch, this was a fun one here. I think it's been a while. It's been a few years since well, not a while since you've been on the show, but a while since we've talked Dolph. So it was fun to kind of get back in and discuss Dolph again.
Yeah, check in where he's been. I mean, like I said, some things have changed a little bit for the better, and I'd be interesting to see if he continues that trajectory of kind of playing to his age. And it's always fascinating to chart somebody's career who's that prolific.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen so many of them, and he does have stuff, in production. So we we definitely got some stuff coming here from him. So yeah, we'll see how that does as well.
Yeah, well, maybe a few years from now we'll be watching one of those.
Right, we'll be doing another Dolph movie for sure. Exactly. Well, thank you again, Mitch, for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.